and Truman fired MacArthur, and we did battle with the Chinese Communist forces, and eventually made it to the East Coast, and left the northern part of Korea, and I was injured, and eventually medevaced to Japan and back to the States.
What happened? What kind of injury?
Order, please. So if you could please take your seats. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to what will hopefully be the final day of this hearing, this special committee meeting of considering the mayor's proposed budget for 2017-2018. I want to thank everyone for what has been a very successful hearing so far. We've conducted over 30 hours of hearings in this one meeting. We've heard presentations and had an opportunity to ask questions of over 30 different city departments. We've heard from the Coalition of LA City Unions, we've heard from the Neighborhood Council Budget Advocates, and we've taken over 100 public comments on just in this one special meeting alone. We've considered 133 substantive budget memos containing vitally important information regarding changes to the mayor's proposed budget, and we'll now come to the conclusion of that process by considering the proposed amendments that will be reported to us by the Chief Legislative Analyst. We'll consider those proposed changes. We'll have an opportunity to consider any additional motions members might like to discuss. We will hear shortly from the Chief of Police, who will be offering a proposal relating to civilian hiring, as we had discussed last week. And then we'll hopefully be able to vote on the amendments, the CLA's proposed amendments today, and we'll be ready for next week. So with that, just as far as the order of business, members, what I'd like to do is go ahead and hear from the chief first to report on the department's proposal with regard to civilian hiring. We will then go to, we would typically take public comment at the beginning, as we have been throughout this hearing, but in light of the magnitude of the changes that are being proposed by the CLA, I think it would be helpful to the public to hear the CLA's report first before we go to comment, and then we'll take comment, and then we'll go into this committee's consideration of the proposal. So with that, any questions or comments, members, before we get started? Okay. Well, we have a full contingent of the committee, and we're ready to begin. So Chief Beck, welcome.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you to the members for hearing me again as we start the next 30 hours of budget hearings. So
we have a good record, Chief. We finished by 7. We're not going to break. We're not going to violate that rule today.
Very good. So the last time we were here, the department heard the council committee clearly that you are desirous of increased civilianization in our budget. So we took a look at it as relates to the additional authorities that we had recommended be added for the MTA, and we have a proposal for you, and I hope that the council will consider it. The entire MTA increase of sworn personnel was about a $6.2 million ticket item by our estimates, and it contained 52 sworn personnel within it. And what we would recommend is that the 33 sworn supervisors that are in that, which accounts for about 2/3 of it, or $4.3 million, that those be put in the sworn salary accounts, and we'd be allowed to hire those. Because if we don't, those 33, and they're primarily sergeants and lieutenants and some staff officers, will have to be pulled from the field. And lack of supervision is a very bad thing in policing. We think it would be detrimental to the city and would be a bad way to start the fiscal year. So what we recommend is that those 33 positions be in the sworn budget, and then in the civilian budget, the other 1.9 million be used for a number of one-for-one civilian positions. And those one-for-one civilian positions that I'm talking about are positions that are currently being done by a full-time Los Angeles police officer that could be redeployed into the field. And so I think this would meet the council's desire to not only get more cops in the field, but to get civilians doing the jobs that they should be doing. So the details of that, there are 19 of these positions, are nine crime analysts that would redeploy sworn officers who are currently analyze crime in the divisions, 7 police performance auditors who would replace the sworn officers who review body-worn and digital in-car video footage, and 3 criminalists who would be deployed and redeploy the sworn officers who currently handle latent prints and property crime and some other analysis positions. That gets us to almost the 1.9 or to about 1.4 million. So that there's an additional about 500,000 left that would stay within the budget allocation, and if the council so desires, we would recommend that money be used to accelerate detention officer hiring. We had the plan within the mayor's budget allows for the at the end of the fiscal year, we would have hired enough detention officers to replace the sworn officers in the jails. But if we could accelerate that a little bit, we will get the sworn officers out sooner and have a net increase to sworn in the field. And the other option, if there is additional funding, would be, or if the council wants to spend the additional funding, is to add 2 more crime analysts, 3 criminalists, and 1 lab tech, which would be 6 additional sworn officers to the field. So this plan would use the same amount of money that was in the original mayor's budget, but use it to fund the sworn supervisory positions for MTA, thereby negating the need to fill those positions from existing resources that are field deployed, and then add as many as 25 fieldable police officers because of their replacement by civilian positions. So we think this is a good way to put more cops where we all want them, which is in the field, and to start restoring our civilian hiring. So I think that is the basics of the proposal. I have Chief Villegas here who can add anything I forgot and help me answer any questions that you have.
Consistent with this committee's request in terms of civilianization and to move more personnel resources out into the field, we're also taking a look at where our personnel are deployed in our administrative capacities and seeing how much we can, reassign to the field. So we're looking at potentially looking at about 10% of our administrative resources and then potentially moving those out into the field. We're also taking a look and doing a brief study about closing the front desks and which divisions those would be, how many of those stations we can close the front desks, and at nighttime that would put about 32, depending on which station it is, between 32 and 40 officers back out into the field. So that's another thing we're doing. We're taking a look at updating the survey within the organization to identify how many full-time officers are doing civilian positions. Although they don't do it in a one-for-one position, they do 10% work here, 20% work there, 30%, so that we can identify how many more or different civilian positions that we can reallocate in the next year's budget in terms of hiring those so that we can push more sworn back out into the field. We're also, I believe, we're going to be funded for a basic car realignment study, so we're going to take a look at that to take a look at the study for our basic cars to identify if there's going to be a realignment of the basic cars so that we can provide a greater level of service to our radio call response and to the public.
The only thing that I would emphasize that Chief Villegas talked about was the 10% that he talked about from the two other offices, and looking at their resources to see what could be reallocated to Office of Operations. We did this when I first became chief in 2010, and it resulted in a little over 200 positions going back to Office of Operations. Over time, some of those positions have drifted back to either the specialized operations or the administrative functions. So we're going to take a look at that. I have mandated that everybody outside of Office of Operation identify 10%, and that could be as many as 200 to 300 officers. So we'll look at that and see about pushing those back out also. And we'd be more than willing when that is completed to come back to council and tell you what exactly that means to deployment of sworn resources.
Well, thank you, Chief. And I think this is a significant step in the right direction where, as you say, we've all wanted to go. So thank you for the proposal. And we will want to be hearing those reports back. We're already committing this committee to be hearing regular reports on MTA overtime status. So as long as we're in that process, probably on a quarterly or so basis, we'll want to hear about the civilian hiring program as well. And I guess the one question I have before I turn to Mr. Englander is, given some of the challenges and delays we've had in actually hiring, do you anticipate that if these civilian positions are provided, that you in fact will be able to fill them during the course of the fiscal year?
Well, I think that from what we've know from Personnel Department and what we see right now, partially because of MTA and because of the fact that our primary competition for hiring, which is the Sheriff's Department, has slowed their hiring down, I think that we will be able to do this. And we have a strong ability to replace these folks and also to hire sworn.
Very good. Thank you. Mr. Englander.
Oh, thank you. And I'd like to, Chief, thank you for coming back to the table. And I know I'd like to thank our chair for working on this as well. I truly appreciate the department stepping up and coming up with, I think, a plan that is a strong one. It's going to net more officers on the street on a regular basis every day, and really appreciate all your work that you've done to do that. And so my actual recommendation then would be to, and I'll just put it out there now, to instruct the CLA to move the Metro funding back into the department budget from the UB and to make the necessary adjustments to the LAPD departmental accounts to effectuate this new plan. And once again, appreciate it. It's not just moving bodies. There was a lot of out-of-the-box thinking as well, and look forward to those report backs and the surveys coming back that I know you'll be doing both on the basic car realignment study and as well as the staff, conducting the staff assessments and reviewing those and working with you on those. So appreciate it, Chief. Thank you very much.
Well, we appreciate it, and I appreciate working with the council on this. And I would also ask, it was we kind of glossed over the change in desk operations, which is a significant return to the field, but it's also a change in the way the LAPD does business. And we had looked at it earlier in my tenure as chief, and at the time the political will wasn't there. And so, what I would ask is if the council, we'll bring it back to the council because it's going to affect all of your jurisdictions, and we need people to understand that this is this is not a reduction of service. It's just a change in the way we deliver service, because people will still get served at the police department. If they show up, we'll just have to call a car in to do that.
Members, anything further for the chief? Mr. Bonnet.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Chief, for coming back to the committee and reacting to some of our concerns. I really appreciate it. For many of us, it's been a concern for a number of years that we've been sort of beating the drum on. And I know we share the same goal of getting as many officers out on the streets as possible. So I'm glad to see you come back with this. I was really clear on everything you said about what happens in this first year with this amount of money. I was thrilled to hear the part about the basic car boundary study, and I'm glad to see that the CLA has money set aside for that in their budget recommendations. I was a little unclear, so I'm just going to ask if you could repeat and be a little bit more clear on what the things are you're considering in the next 2 or 3 years to help. I understand the front desk thing, but there are a couple other things that just went by a little bit too quickly for me.
Well, so we have the immediate thing, which is the redeployment of resources from. There's 3 offices in Los Angeles Police Department. The offices are the big chunks of the organization. Office of Operations, which is what you think of as the patrol service delivery system, is about 6,700, depending on the time of year, officers, and the rest of the organization it comprises the other 3,300. And so what we've asked is the rest of the organization to identify 10% that would go back if I mandated 10%, and then we'll further look at that to see if there's parts of that don't make any sense and that kind of thing, and then we'll, from all of that, we'll develop a number of folks that will go back to the field, and that should happen in the immediate future, because I've mandated that the offices give me their personnel lists before the end of the fiscal year. So we should be doing that in the first portion of next fiscal year. Because I haven't seen what the officers are going to give me, I can't tell you exactly how many folks that is. I can tell you the last time I did this, it resulted in over 200 people going back to the field. And I think any big organization that has all the pushes and pulls that the police department does has to do these things regularly, because, as you all know, in our profession. We enjoy the luxury of everybody wanting more, and so everybody there's a lot of push and pull on resources. So they tend to go, since the big blue ocean is in patrol. That's where they tend to leave from for specialized assignments. So we're going to look at that, and that will be that's a comprehensive study that will have a big impact. And then in the longer term, we're doing a survey of staff assignments, the existing assignments that could be done by a civilian, so we'll have a more comprehensive list, especially the one-for-ones. The one-for-ones are huge because everybody does, including the council members. You all do things that probably should be done by clerical, just because that's the reality of the city of Los Angeles. We just don't have the staff that we should. But the one-for-ones, the ones like the officers in the jail, which we should be rid of by the end of the fiscal year with this plan. Officers doing the in-car video review, officers doing analysis of fingerprints or of scientific evidence, those kind of things. I want to know about all of those so we can have a better plan on when to on how to relieve these issues. What else did we talk about, George? Anything?
Surveillance survey, that's the one that's going to net us the most, but that's going to take a long time.
I'm sorry, Chief, your mic wasn't on.
I said, no, I think the Chief is talking about the surveillance survey. That's the one that's going to net us the most, but it'll take us the longest amount of time to get there, because it's going to be incorporated into the budget process and requesting for new authorities.
Right.
Because we've ERIP'd, or over the course of years, we've swept those vacancies out of the authority, so we don't have those authorities.
So did I want to make sure I heard you correctly, or clarify if I heard you incorrectly. You were talking about the sort of the two pools within LAPD, the 66, 6,700 and the 3,300 or so. Was I correct in saying that, in hearing that your goal was to try to find 10% of the 3,300 to redeploy back into the field?
That's what I've asked them to identify. Then I will look at that 10% and determine, because they're all going to give me 10%.
Yeah.
But I'm going to look at it and say, well, yeah, but I can't lose 10% of my helicopter pilots, or I can't
Right.
lose 10% of this. Right? So I will review it, and what my point was the last time we did this, and it was the same math, we realized about 200 officers to the field.
Okay, that's encouraging. I know Mr. Buscaino and I had the motion from a few months ago asking the department to look at some of the specialized units that I imagine will be part of that. That'll look at things like kit room officers, alarm section, entertainment trademark units, and stuff like that as well.
Well, the kit room officers are part of Office of Operations, so we will, that will be part of, and Office of Operations is doing the same thing, trying to identify what they could civilianize or do other things with, and that might be one of the positions. The alarm section, I mean, since you brought that up specifically, that's the police commission, and I don't think we have any sworn in the alarm section right now. I could be wrong. But if we did, they would almost certainly be light duty and unfieldable. And then what was the third one? I'm sorry.
The ETU, the Entertainment Trademarks Unit.
That it would be included in the review by Office of Special Services. So if they were to include that, then we would look at it.
Yeah, just because I think you touched on an important point. Is there was a point at which you assessed, probably correctly, that there might not have been the political will to look at some of the overnight front desk staffing. I think the will is probably there now because there's such a hunger for patrol resources, but it'll be a much easier conversation for us and for you with constituents if we're also able to say, as part of this examination and as part of this, the department has looked at this, and this among those things that I just listed.
Well, and that's my goal, is to do this all at the same time, because this is the nature the nature of any business. Especially in times when budgets aren't what we all want them to be. You got to look at what you do, and also included in that is the removal of that 10%. What will we be unable to do?
Right.
See, because like when we talk about the front desk, I'll be unable at certain stations to have somebody come to the front desk at midnight and make a report. They'll be able to come to the police station and a police officer will meet them, but it won't be from the front desk.
Right.
So anyway, that's just kind of the same type of thing. What won't we be able to do? And I want to be brutally honest about that.
And since the last time we looked at that, because of Mr. Englander's leadership, we now have the ability for folks to do some reports online that we didn't have years ago.
Yeah. Well, hopefully I hope that ability will stay intact. That's another part of the budget that we're trying to deal with.
Just a quick question on the Metro monies and how you said you would do the 33 sworn supervisors. Then you were talking about the 1-for-1, the 9 crime analysts, the 7 police performance auditors, the 3 criminalists. The folks who are performing those duties now, they would wind up being added to patrol. That's how they'd be redeployed.
Well, yeah, they would. Well, I mean, as the positions would be.
Yeah.
I mean, the individuals, I'm not
Right.
sure where they
Yeah.
would go, but the positions would end up coming back to patrol. Although, we still have that debt and promise to MTA, which
Yes.
so 19 authorities will end up going to MTA because that is what we promised, and that's part of the plan. But we were able to realize a number of other folks that will go back to patrol. That's the other 6, because of the salary savings, because of the hiring of civilians. So the civilians are somewhat cheaper or less expensive. Cheaper is not a good word. Less expensive, and that will allow us to hire an additional, and those would certainly go back to the field.
And the final question, because I forgot to ask it the other day, is I know the Metro contract provides for a total of 69 LAPD full-time positions, the 52 that we're talking about now, but then there were also, aside from the civilians we're talking about from this pool, 17 civilians, and I'm just wondering where that's programmed into the budget. Maybe that's a CAO question.
Well, excuse me, I noticed that those 17 positions are also in that same Blue Book item for the Metro.
Okay.
So those are
All right.
Yeah, so those will be
They'll
fun.
be hired.
Okay.
We'd be continuing the resolution authorities that were just approved.
Okay, great. So, Chief, I just want to thank you again for not just for coming here today. I really, really appreciate that, but for the fact that you heard what our concern was and our constituents' concern was. I know sometimes I've been a pain in the butt, but I appreciate the work that's gone into this.
Well, Councilman, I'm not always stubborn, okay? just generally.
Thanks.
Mr. Blumenfield?
Echo the gratitude for you coming here, but putting together the civilian plan. It does get us more officers out in the field, which is something that we have all been pushing, and it's smarter finance. You know, you hire 4 civilians, you get 5 officers out, which is what we all want, and this is a great way to get that process rolling even further through the department. There was one piece, you said there's $500,000 for detention hiring out of it was $1.4 million. It sounded like there was still a question. I wanted to make sure we had nailed down what's being proposed exactly. That are we talking about 19 officers or 25 officers?
Well, so there are 19 positions that would go back to MTA. So, and those 19 positions are being produced by the hiring of 19 civilians. But then because we saved money with the 19 civilians, I'm able to give you an additional 6 civilian hires within the same amount of money.
Right.
That would cause an additional 6 sworn to go to the field. So I know it's, in a big organization it's a small number, but it meets the council's desire to hire smart instead of just go straight for the blue suit.
Right, and so that's what we land, because I thought you were saying there's some discretion there about in terms of where that 500,000.
Well, discretion is yours. I mean, this is our proposal, and we propose that we move the detention hiring up, so I get those young, very fieldable police officers out of the jail right away. Because that's an immediate, that's an immediate increase in resource, and then the additional 6 civilian positions that would still stay within that amount of money, the total amount of money, would go directly to the field. So.
Great. No, it's good low-hanging fruit, and at the end of the day, this is going to produce more officers out in the field overall. I mean, the Metro contract itself was a good step in that direction because we're getting more folks in LA, but now this tweak on it will get even more. So
no, the Metro contract will make a big difference in public safety in Los Angeles. I believe that to my core, and I know that is going to be something that we all look back on as a very, very good decision by the city of Los Angeles.
And as part of that, what's often overlooked, I think, is that even before we had that Metro contract, our officers were spending time answering calls along Metro because it's in our area. I don't know if that was ever calculated how much we were already spending. Has that, to your knowledge, has that ever?
Unless I'm wrong, we were never able to quantify it except for to say that if you call 911, the closest unit shows up and it's always us.
Right.
Because it's always us.
That's just a good, reaffirmation that what we're doing here, we're not only this civilian tweak is not only going to get us more officers in the field, but the overall Metro contract is really going to push us to get more folks out there and on patrol. So thank you very much.
And very visible too.
Thank you. Mr. Englander?
Just to close, if I could, it was suggested that if you could, Chief, put together just a one-page on the updated survey that you described in terms of the staff assessments and evaluations and what we'll be doing, so we can share those with the CPABs and get some input. Councilmember Bonnet had contacted me about asking you for that. I forgot to ask. So if you could do that, and perhaps just get that to Harry to work with us, so that would be great. And with that, I've got nothing further. I just wanted to thank you again for this plan.
Okay. Thank you, and thank you very much, Chief. As all members have said, this is something we've wanted to do for a long time, and it achieves a lot of great policy objectives. It creates cost efficiency, gets more presence of sworn officers out on the street, and it uses the right tool for the job. It's just a waste of human resources to have trained police officers acting as jailers. And as we move towards completely eliminating their presence there, it creates better operation, more cost efficiency, and safer streets. So this is really a well thought out proposal that's moving us in the right direction. I really want to express our collective appreciation for your leadership in getting this done. And we won't be acting on this now, members. We'll take it all up after the CLA report, but we do want to very much thank you. And we'll continue to be having this discussion as we go forward with the budget year, just to see how the hiring is going and whether there's any other adjustments we need to be making. But I think it's clearly going in the right direction. So thanks very much.
Well, and I thank you.
All right. Thank you, Chief. And so that brings us next to the CLA. So I'm going to ask Ms. So and her staff to come on up and present their report.
Yes. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So the item before you is the CLA recommendations with regard to the proposed budget. It is based on your committee hearings, your directions to us, CAO memos, the departmental requests, as well as communications to this committee and additional analysis by this office. Our recommendations address your priorities A plus, A minus, B plus, B minus. Mostly will be addressed in our recommendations that Andrea will walk you through. In summary, the budget that we are proposing would add a net $50 million in additional revenues, of which we would suggest that $10 million be included in the unappropriated balance mid-year adjustment line item, and an additional $21 million in a new line item within the UB for contingent revenues. In addition to that, our recommendations also include a number of restorations to very high priority items that you requested as a committee, and we will discuss those in further detail. There are also proposals relative to the transit funding, which received a lot of discussion during the budget process, as well as a proposal on LASA funding. There are also some additional changes that we are recommending to make a few reductions to some departmental and non-departmental accounts. All in all, the net change is about a $4.8 million remaining amount to be allocated, and of that amount, we would recommend that you set aside $1.5 million of that amount into the Budget Stabilization Fund, with $3.3 million to the Reserve Fund. So we will get into further detail. We can go page by page, but just one word of caution as we go forward on this. This budget is based on what we know, not what we don't know. And so there are a number of looming issues that we're going to have to address in the very, very near future. And so a number of our recommendations where we provide 6 months funding is to provide some cushion for some of those unknowns, as well as providing some additional contingency funds. But we know that there are changes coming up, and so just want to put that on your radar, that there are difficult times ahead, potentially, and we're probably going to need to make some changes in the very, very near future as it relates to our programs and service levels. And so with that, I'd like to turn it over to Andrea. Our committee report recommendations start on page 4 of the attachment. And so I'll turn it over to Andrea.
Before we get to the specific recommendations, I do just want to kind of re-emphasize your last point so that it doesn't get overlooked in what is otherwise a fair amount of good news in these proposals. Congratulations in doing the work that you've done and reevaluating the assumptions and all of the work that you do in assessing our recommendations and the mayor's proposal. I think we are in significantly better position to be optimistic about funding things than we were even a couple of weeks ago, just because of this work. And that's great news, and we'll get into the details of that. but we can't emphasize often enough or strongly enough the degree of potential risks the city still faces, both within this budget year and in future budget years. And among them are potential increases in our pension obligations, the continuing challenges that we have in maintaining control over liability on the part of the city, potential increases in workers' compensation costs, and our inability to date to drive those costs down through risk reduction and otherwise. We have labor agreements that will be coming up where our labor partners will be asking for things that are not assumed in this budget or in our longer-term projections. And then there's all the things that are potentially completely unknowable, like the federal government's actions that it may take with regard to grant funding and otherwise. So there's a lot of things that are uncertain, and that's why I think it's so important, to your point, that we continue to keep as much flexibility as we can for mid-year adjustments, but that we also be mindful of the need to continue to be prudent in order to prevent future year problems that result from what we do this year as well. So with that somewhat dour note, let's get to the better news that we have in the specific recommendations. Ms. Galvin.
Good afternoon. As Sharon stated, the recommendations begin on page 4. These are all of the revenue changes that we've recommended. If you'd like to...
Yeah, and so members, just as a reminder, what we've typically done is, because there are many recommendations contained in this report, we usually go page by page, and then if you want to call out some of the recommendations on each page for lengthier discussion, we can sort of call those special, and then we'll come back to them. Or if it's a simple question that we can respond on, that CLA can respond on the fly, we can do that. But so as we go through each of these pages, please note anything that you want to have a longer discussion on. We'll note it, and then we'll come back at the end.
So we're on page 4 and 5 for revenue changes. Is everyone okay?
And the decrease in ambulance transport fees was a negative impact because of the trend lines of past years. Is that you're just making a more conservative estimate on this?
There is actually a reduction in the revenue receipts. The proposed budget actually contemplated a reduction. There does appear to be a trend line that the receipts are coming lower than in past years. It probably is something that we will need to look at more carefully because it's uncertain as far as whether it relates to reimbursements or whether it relates to billing or whether it relates to fewer transports. So that is probably something that this committee might want to delve further into during the upcoming fiscal year.
It will be indeed, and I appreciate the more conservative number in this budget. I do think it's something that's separate from this budget we're going to have to follow up considerably, especially given the investments that we've made in hardware, for example, and other changes in order to maximize the recoverability of these fees. So I think we really will need to work with the Public Safety Committee to determine why is that trend line happening? Why isn't it going in the positive direction that we had anticipated it should be a few years ago? Mr. Englander.
Yeah, and one of the things we're going to be looking at, just to put it on the CLA's radar, that we've already begun discussions with the fire department on and been working with the chief on, is that we don't have a treatment non-transport fee. And we are starting to do those now because of the new units we have, particularly with nurse practitioners and others, physician assistants, and things we're expanding in community paramedicine and telemedicine. And so, but we don't have any fees structured to that, but there's a direct cost. And although much cheaper than a transport, there's no structure for it. So that's one of the things we're looking at as well.
Okay. Anything else on page 4, members? Anything on page 5? It's a short page.
So if we'd like to move on to expenditure changes, those begin on page 6. and they go through page 12. But if you want to focus on page 6, we have the Aging Department, Animal Services, Capital Finance, CIEP, City Attorney, City Clerk, Controller, Disability, and Economic and Workforce Development.
Mr. Englander?
Yeah, I have a recommendation on the economic and workforce development action. That's the last item on the page. What I'd like to do on that is actually put 6 months of funding for that authority in the UB, and it'll be pending a report back to council on the net new targeted local hire successes. I think this is something we need to carefully monitor and make sure specifically for unsheltered individuals in support of ED 15 over and above the initial soft launch period. So what I'm asking is that they come back with the 6 months to the Budget and Finance Committee with that metric to show that they're meeting the goals and objectives for the local targeted hire.
I think that seems very reasonable, but can we act? Maybe we can do that by consensus unless anybody has concerns. Okay. So we won't need to amend. We'll just go ahead and modify that. That'll be the action of the committee.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
I just want to ask the department if that poses any problems sort of procedurally in terms of contracts or anything else they might be doing.
Okay,
I
so
mean, it
you
sounds
know what?
perfectly
I'm
fine,
sorry.
but-
Before we start doing that, let's
Yeah.
just put a pin in that one
Okay.
then, and we'll hold it, Mr. Englander, and we'll come back at the end so that we can get the departments to come up. So if you just let's just mark that. Okay. Page 7.
Page 7 continues expenditure changes for EMD, Ethics Commission, Finance, and Fire. And then Fire continues on the next page with UB items, but if there's any questions on page 7.
Okay.
Okay, moving on to page 8, we continue with Fire and the UB. GCP, which has a number of items for various departments across the city, Housing and Community Investment, and Human Resources Benefits. We okay?
Okay.
Okay. Page 9, we continue with Human Resources Benefits, ITA, ITA and Controller in terms of PACER, ITA and Personnel, and then ITA Police and the unappropriated balance for police phone systems.
Yeah. 9. Okay, Mr. Englander?
On item 9, on the second bullet for the procurement automation, it was proposed in the budget originally that there was going to be a significant savings by incorporating this investment. So I'd like to include a metric for this for procurement automation so we can quantify it that targets the purported savings generation. That's it. That was number 9 under the second bullet under ITA. Oh, page 9. Mm-hmm. So we have the increased funding for the procurement automation to digitize construction contracting. In the original mayor's budget, it alluded to the fact that with that investment, we would save roughly $9 million. And I'd like to quantify that with a metric for them to come back and just add that to a metric that if it's measurable, since they did measure it, that we see the results of that.
Okay.
That's all.
Anything else on page 9? So moving on to page 10, we start with LASA, go down to Neighborhood Empowerment, Personnel, and the beginning of the Police Department.
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Bonner?
Not a question. I just want to say, I want to thank the CLA. I think the handling of the complicated and uncertain situation with LASA and homelessness was very thoughtfully done and well handled by your recommendation. And as I had noted over the past couple weeks, my level of alarm about a couple different things. I've been in touch with the county and I've seen the progress of what they're doing on their Measure H, and many of my concerns have been significantly eased by the recommendations that they have put out. It still leaves a gap of the county not funding street programming, showers and storage, but that's addressed, I think, reasonably in this recommendation. I just want to say thank you and I support this.
Moving on to page 11, we have police and the UB, Board of Public Works, Contract Administration, Sanitation, Recreation and Parks, and Transportation.
Anything on page 11, members?
Yes.
Mr. England.
So I want to reiterate my request on page 11 with respect to the Los Angeles Police Department plan and to instruct the CLA to move the Metro funding back into the department's budget from the UB and to make the necessary adjustments to the Los Angeles Police Department departmental accounts to effectuate the chief's plan. And then lastly, not really a change but a statement on the Public Works Sanitation. Just want to put it out there. It's adding the resolution authority and 6 months funding for the Assistant Director of Sanitation for external affairs. It's a 5% general fund, so it's minuscule, but it was the general manager that came to this very committee in the last conversation that said that it would be 100% special funded and there would be no need to assume any general funds. So it's just a statement, an acknowledgement on Enrique. Okay, thanks.
Okay, and you're keeping a list of your motions so that we can, okay, good, very good. So move on to page 12,
Okay, we can move
please.
on to page 12. At the top of the page, you will see Vision Zero Street Reconstruction Program, which is Transportation, Public Works, Street Services, and GSD. There's also the unappropriated balance and new and expanded programs.
Okay.
Just want
Mr.
to ask
Bonner?
one question, Mr. Chair. The CLA recommendation includes a recommendation to delete the CIEP funds for signal construction, and I'm wondering if it might be wise to strike that recommendation so that we can use the CIEP funds to do the signals, and then we have this money to consider for the other uses.
I think this is street lighting, isn't it? As opposed to
Which item is that,
signalization.
Mr. Bonnet?
It was the last item under transportation on page 12.
On page 12. Because there had been the CIEP issues with
Right.
traffic signals, and then...
Is this not what I'm
is it-
thinking of?
So this was a general funded item that could be funded by Measure M, or I don't remember which one we used, but Measure M or Measure R. So that was a general funded item. This allowed us to pay for those street lights with transit dollars as opposed to using the general fund. And that relieved the general fund, and we could use it to fund some of the items here. So it's not being deleted. It's not being deleted. It's funded by transit dollars.
This is not the signal construction that was in
No,
the
sir.
CIEP? Okay,
No.
got it. Withdraw the question.
Okay, anything else on page 12? Moving on.
Moving on to page 13, these are other changes. Many of these departments receive authorities with funding that will be reimbursed with special funds. Building and safety, a reallocation of funds within CIEP, planning, Public Works Board, and Public Works Contract Administration. That's page 13.
Okay.
And then page 14 continues those other changes with sanitation, and then transferring money from the UB to their respective departments. Page 15 is notes the transfer that we recommend to the Budget Stabilization Fund of $1.5 million. It also notes the reserve fund balance and the 5.11% reserve fund percentage that we're looking at with these recommendations.
So on the Budget Stabilization Fund, we had discussed earlier that the Budget Stabilization Fund policy was met in the mayor's proposed budget by the CIEP capital investment, right? So in addition to that, this is adding another $1.5 million to budget stabilization that's beyond policy. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And then with the reserve fund impact, mayor's proposed budget was just above 5.0.
5.09.
It's 5.09. So we have a little bit of an increase as well in the reserve fund impact. Okay, very good. Thank you.
Okay, moving on to page 16. At the top of page 16, there's a reference to Exhibit H, which is attachment 4 of our report. And we have, we recommend these items that are intended to effectuate the budget. If there's any questions on Exhibit H. And then there are general instructions on page 16. Moving on to page 17 are technical adjustments. These are often programs with or departments that we are recommending positions without funding. There's also MICLA financing recommendations, and that goes through city attorney, cultural affairs, fire, general services, housing and community investment, and public accountability. Those, I'm sorry.
On this page, Mr. Chair, I wanted
Mr. Bloomfield.
propose one additional technical adjustment. There was a memo that was handed out from Ted Ross, General Manager of ITA. It was sort of a last-minute request, but it's not a general fund impact. It's to add one assistant general manager, and one way to do that, since it's less, is to add one general manager for ITA without funding, subject to review and allocation by the personnel department, the cost of which would be offset in part by the deletion of a chief management analyst. So it's a way to honor that request without impacting the budget. So I would ask that we add that in as outlined, and I've been through this with the CLA.
Okay.
Okay.
Is there any need to discuss that? I don't see any, so I think by consensus that would be the action of the committee as well.
Okay, moving on to page 18, we continue with technical adjustments, and there's Public Works Board, BOE, street lighting, UB, and then we have some budget notes which amend various parts of the proposed budget. If there's no questions on those, when we go through our attachments, just to note, attachment 1 is connected to the LASA recommendation on page 10 of expenditures. Attachment 2 deals with the Vision Zero street reconstruction, which is on page 12. Attachment 3 deals with new and expanded programs, which is on page 12 as well. Attachment 4 is Exhibit H changes. And then we get to Attachment 5, which are all the special studies that were requested during the budget hearings.
And just one note on the special studies. It's been brought to our attention that there are a few of them where the department needs to be corrected. So as you give us instructions on technical changes, we'd like to make those changes for the final report.
Yeah, please do. And remember, all of the special study reports, members will be considered separately. They'll be referred to the appropriate policy committee as necessary. There's no great urgency on those, but for clarity of the report, let's make sure we properly assign them. Yeah, Mr. Englander.
Just a quick question for for clarity on attachment 4, the last bullet, H8, is that revenue already programmed and assumed into the general fund, into this budget?
Yes, it is. And for the zoo admission,
I'm sorry?
this is on
H8, the last one?
H8. Yes,
Attachment
yes,
4.
it is.
That's already programmed? Oh.
Okay, and special studies are the last attachment, so that's everything. Go ahead.
Sorry, one more. On attachment 5, page 4, number R30 under finance. We'll ask for a technical correction and change, where right now it's instructing the Office of Finance with the assistance of the Los Angeles Police Department to report to the Public Safety Committee. It should be with the Los Angeles Police Department and City Attorney, so I'd like to add the City Attorney to that.
No objection. Anything else? Okay. Ms. Ho.
There's just one item that you called special that had not been discussed further, and that was Mr. Englander's request to discuss the Economic and Workforce Development Department
so
item.
I think that was the only one requiring discussion, right? So let's go ahead and bring the department up then to be able to respond to Mr. Bonnen's questions. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Robert Science, Assistant General Manager, Economic and Workforce Development Department. So on behalf of Jan Perry and the rest of the department, we actually want to say thank you for including the $2 million for LA Rise in the CLA budget. So thank you all. And it won't have an impact of us having the $1 million put in the UB, and we'll come back and give you some of the great reports that we've been having on this particular program. So
Excellent.
Not a problem.
Okay. They've been great reports already, and there's data to support the program. It's just, I think the interface with the targeted hiring is something we're going to want to stay on top of.
So
it makes
just a
perfect
couple
sense.
quick numbers for you to walk away from.
Sure.
Your initial investment of 275, we have 275 individuals that have already been in the program during this current year. All 275 have had subsidized employment, and we had 60 that are now in private sector employment. In our target hiring program, which is a separate program really run through the personnel department, there's over 900 folks that have made actually city applications, and 32 have been hired. So it's been some really great numbers in both programs.
Great. Thank you. We're getting there.
Yes.
All right. Anything else, members? Okay, then we're going to defer the actual discussion, debate, and voting on motions until after we've taken public comment. But anything else from CLA? Thank you very much. Terrific report. Great work. I think we can all rest a little bit easier now. Subject to all the qualifiers that I said at the beginning, but for this year's budget, this is a huge improvement over where we were just a week ago. So thank you all very, very much. All right. So now we're going to go to public comment. And remember, please, that this is a special meeting of the Budget and Finance Committee, so public comment will be specific to this budget and our consideration of it and the recommendations of the CLA and anything relating to this year's budget, but not other issues that might be within the jurisdiction of this committee, as it is a special meeting. So our first, and it's 1 minute per speaker. Our first speaker will be Teresita Villaseñor, followed by T. Satar, followed by Ian Camus. Just come on up. If I called your name, come on up. Followed by Amelia from the Filipino Workers Center. Go ahead, ma'am. Just come on up, say your name, and go right ahead.
Oh. Hi, thank you. Good morning or good afternoon. Terry from Association of Filipino Workers Center. And I'd like to make a comment that removal of the defense is now pressing a legal needs of facing for our immigrant community member. And in most cases, those people who are detained with no lawyers, especially in Los Angeles areas, are now need in lawyers. So people who are detained without lawyers are now, it was like need most lawyers, but people with lawyers with their immigrant cases oftentimes or 5 times as much succeed. So without lawyers, it's difficult. So thank you very much.
Ma'am, I'm sorry, what's your last name?
My last name is Villaseñor.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you. You were,
All right.
You were the first one I called. Great, thank you. So our next speaker will be T. Satar, followed by Ian Camus, followed by Amelia. Any of them here? Go right. Come on up. If I call your name and you're the first to the mic, come on up.
Good afternoon. My name is Ian Camus. I am affiliated with the Filipino Workers Center based in historic Filipino town. I'm here today to urge the Budget and Finance Committee to approve the $1 million in the mayor's budget and immediately allocate it to the LA Justice Fund. We support a fully inclusive justice fund. Justice knows no carve-outs. This should be built on basic due process principles. People should have a lawyer and by their side when the judge is considering whether they should face permanent exile. I know in my community, the Filipino American community, there are immigrants who are living in the shadows, who are fearful because they are afraid and they do not have the rights of due process when they are faced with in immigration proceedings and deportation cases. So again, I urge the Budget and Finance Committee to approve the full $1 million in the mayor's budget and immediately allocate it to the LA Justice Fund. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is T. Satar here, or maybe it's Safar? I can't quite make it up. With the Filipino Workers Center? No? Okay. Amelia, followed by Mirla Baldonado, followed by David Abud.
Yes, good afternoon to everybody. This is Amelia from the Barnachia from the Filipino Workers Association. I am also a member. I want to say something about immigration, in which they're already here, and why is it that President Trump is still going to let him to deport them? They're already here. Why is it that they're already here, and why not let them pay for their immigration instead of letting them back? And another is that regardless of immigration status, we also have the right to get an attorney. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Mirla Baldonado, followed by David Abud, followed by Eric Previn.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. I'm giving voice to 400,000 Filipino Americans who reside in the Los Angeles area. They're fearful and desperate. I encounter them every day as an organizer of the Filipino Workers Center. Just recently, one of our members signed his own deportation. When he asked for a lawyer, he was told that he had no rights. So after 10 hours, he was back in the Philippines. Thus, we are concerned and well aware that the claims that our officials said when the new administration set in, that Los Angeles is a sanctuary city is empty and hollow unless we put money where it's needed. So I fully urge the Budget and Finance Committee to approve the full $1 million budget. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Mirla Baldonado, followed by David Abud.
That was Mirla Baldonado.
I'm sorry.
My name is David Abud.
Okay, I'm sorry, Mr. Abud. You'll be followed by Eric Previn, followed by Elsa Tung. Go right ahead.
Thank you. So I also want to come up here to stand in support of the $1 million that you should be allocating to the LA Justice Fund. I want to address this in particular to Councilmember Martinez. I was in Van Nuys on Wednesday at the Van Nuys Neighborhood Council, who approved a community impact statement by a vote of 13-1, asking in part, one of the parts that it was asking for is, and I quote, ensure that undocumented immigrants facing deportation remain entitled to legal representation and the due process of the law without exception. They join other neighborhood councils such as Highland Park and Arroyo Seco and a few others who are submitting these community impact statements. And so I ask that I'm here to say that there's broad demand from your own constituents to fully fund the LA Justice Fund, to allocate those $1 million to them, to the LA Justice Fund. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you. Thank you. And was that David?
It's Eric Previn.
Yeah. Come on.
It's Eric Previn from the 3rd District. Thank you.
Which district?
Vision Zero. Unfortunately, Another Zero favors bicycles. City Attorney, 2 more positions is okay as long as they pull out 10 positions. This group has bungled badly. Regarding the APRU, I'd like to know about the public-private partnership you referenced, Mr. Englander, because a public-private ambulance deal for Mr. Berghoff, sorry, that's not okay. Regarding the boundary study for $224,000, we ought to get a public-private partnership for them to fund that, because they know how to police the area, and everybody knows they do. MICLA, no $250,000 to upgrade Sheila Kuehl's office, Mr. Bonin. Thank you. She can afford it. Sheila, that is. $8 million we can get back from Taser doing business as Axon. So I would ask this body who wants that money for our city employees to go get it. They are offering that refund for people who sign up, so let's do it. Come on, that's not appropriate not to. And City Hall trespassing, you got to be kidding me. We don't need more security. We need a reasonable approach, and it's not warranted, so no thank you, Herb Wesson. And regarding the HHH restroom
Thank
matter,
you very much. Next speaker, Elsa. Hello.
Good afternoon. Elsa Tung, LA Neighborhood Land Trust. Council members, how is it acceptable that 2 out of every 3 Angelenos are park poor, and clear disparities exist across race, income, and geography? How is it acceptable that 75% of the city's non-white population lives in areas of high and very high park need? The answer is it's not acceptable. We need to fund our park system and fight for park equity. We sincerely thank the committee for restoring the position authorities for 53 critical garden caretaker positions and urge you to fully fund all 53 positions. But beyond staffing, this committee knows that RAP's skyrocketing chargebacks in the form of utility payments and general fund reimbursements are crippling the department's ability to spend on core services and programs. We urge you to work expeditiously to resolve this issue of chargebacks. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Our next speaker is Herman, followed by Daniel Worley, followed by Angie Song.
Under Attachment 5, under Disability R24, what gives you the right to make a determination where the disabled can park? Yes, we are disabled. We have placards. We can park anywhere in the hell we want. So fix the budget around our disabilities. And fuck you for HHH to bitch, bitch, bitch. Get that fucking budget working so those of us who are homeless can get back to fucking work. Living in conditions of poverty is unacceptable in the city of Los Angeles. No to the Olympics. Fuck you for the Olympics, because the Olympics start here. Get Herman to work. Get Spindler to work. Get Michael Hunt to work. And as far as I'm concerned, this budget on disability, fuck you, and Sacramento, fuck you twice. Get the disabled parking back on Broadway Fiesta.
Our next speaker is Daniel Worley, followed by Angie Song, followed by Arturo Garcia.
Thank you. I'm Daniel Worley with the Advancement Project California. I'd like to thank the Budget and Finance Committee for restoring the funding to the 53 garden caretaker positions that were proposed to be cut from the Recreation and Parks Department. These positions we know are important in that they preserve clean and safe parks, they decrease the city's exposure to liability, and lastly, provide rapid response for the city's homeless population. The long-term value of these positions has already been crystallized by Measure A, and also these drive down the costs that were identified in Measure A. But I do want to highlight a few additional interdepartmental issues, mainly that the skyrocketing utility costs are expected to double within 5 years, and also that the percentage of overall budgeting going to programs and services rather than mere overhead 9 years ago was 92% for services and programs, and now has been slashed to 61%. I want to thank you, and please support the low-income communities of color with park funding. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Our next speaker is Angie Song, followed by Arturo Garcia, followed by Brenda Gutierrez.
Good afternoon, council members, members of the community. My name is Angie Song. I'm a project manager at the Trust for Public Land, and I'm here on behalf of the Our Parks Coalition that represents over 60 organizations who care about parks and open space in the LA County. Thank you for restoring the position authorities for 44 gardener caretakers and 9 senior gardeners. These 53 critical positions are the heart of the Rec and Parks Department ground maintenance staff. We absolutely cannot afford to lose them, and we urge you to fully fund all 53 positions. We talked about the soaring chargebacks in the form of utility payments and mandated general fund reimbursements. They're stifling the department's ability to spend on core services and programs. More broadly, the city must begin to reverse years of diminished park funding and disinvestments to ensure that Los Angeles no longer ranks 51st out of the 100 largest U.S. cities in per capita park spending. A budget is a moral document, and there's no greater opportunity to align the city's priorities on health, safety, economic vitality, and sustainability within its actions to fund recs and parks. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Arturo Garcia, followed by Brenda Gutierrez, followed by Rob Kwan.
I'm Arturo Garcia. I represent the Filipino-American community. I urge the Budget and Finance Committee to approve the full $1 million in the mayor's budget and immediately allocate it to the LA Justice Fund. We support a fully inclusive LA Justice Fund that do not have carve-outs. It should be built on the basic due process. People should have a lawyer by their side while a judge is considering whether they should have permanent exile. In the face of the Department of Justice and Trump's new rules on crimes, it is very unfair to make people be criminalized. The $1 million investment is a start for the defense of minority and immigrant rights. Thank you very much, and I hope you will support this budget. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you, sir. And thank you for what you do on behalf of Filipino veterans as well, sir. Our next speaker is Brenda Gutierrez, followed by Rob Kwan, followed by Mylene Carberry.
Good afternoon. My name is Brenda Gutierrez. I urge the Budget and Finance Committee to approve the full $1 million in the mayor's budget and immediately allocate it to the LA Justice Fund. My best friend that I've known since I was 14 years old, I'm now 34, sits in Adelanto Detention Center awaiting deportation because he can't afford a lawyer. He's going to miss Mother's Day again for the second year in a row. His birthday is this month, and he won't get to spend it with his family. His kids, his wife, miss him every day. He's been here his whole life, and he has nothing in Mexico. His whole life is here. My heart breaks every day because I know he will be deported any day now because his family can't afford a lawyer to fight for him. We need the LA Justice Fund. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Rob Kwan, followed by Mylene Carberry, followed by Wayne. Mr. Kwan here? Okay. Ms. Carberry, followed by Mr. Spindler, followed by Amethyst Ewan.
Hi, thank you so much for everything you're doing and representing us as our council people. I appreciate it. I want to encourage us to approve the $1 million for the LA Justice Fund and to have a universal representation I just keep on thinking of the Pledge of Allegiance and liberty and justice for all. And the only way that's maintained is if everybody has fair representation in court. We don't get to pick and choose who gets representation. You know, that's not fair. That's not a democracy. Everyone deserves it. Plus, it is more cost-effective for us in the city not to have to prove merit, but just to give across-the-board representation for people. If they're guilty, they'll be deported. But if they're not, at least they have a fair chance. I know my time is up, but I was helping a family who was devastated by these inequities last weekend, where someone who was seeking asylum was deported and then they were murdered, and that was someone's son, and the family was devastated. So I just don't want to see that continue to happen. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Mr. Spindler, followed by Amethyst Ewing, followed by Vanessa De Leon.
So, the 2017-18 budget code proposal. I don't think that you crossed the T's and dotted the I's, Mr. Goat-ass Krikorian.
Stay on topic or you're done. Use words to speak or you're done.
The following budgetary reporting process and protocols for the fucking goat recommended to assist the Budget and Finance Committee during the fiscal year. That's what I'm talking about, speaking in the native tongue of Paul Krikorian, the fucking goat man. Budget and finance is full of shit. Finally, take your budget and fuck you.
Our next speaker is Amethyst Ewing, followed by Vanessa De Leon, followed by Orino Opinaldo.
My name is Amethyst Ewing with the Youth Justice Coalition, and I urge the Budget and Finance Committee to approve the full $1 million in the mayor's budget and immediately allocate it to the LA Justice Fund. We are in the middle of a crisis with the federal government targeting immigrants, ramping up immigrant enforcement, and undermining the basic due process rights of our immigrant community members. We need the city to support our immigrant communities in the face of this crisis. We support a fully inclusive LA Justice Fund. Justice knows no carve-outs. However, the eligibility criteria in the CAO report and endorsed and the Add HOC Immigrants and Civil Rights Committee and the bare minimum that can be accepted. I was going to say, we want universal protection with no carve-out.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Vanessa De Leon, followed by Orino Opinaldo, followed by Beverly Roberts.
My name is Vanessa De Leon with the Youth Justice Coalition, and I urge you all to approve the $1 million in the mayor's budget to immediately allocate it to the LA Justice Fund. Removal defense is the most pressing legal need facing our immigrant community members. My uncle and his family moved to Los Angeles as a young boy, and he graduated from high school, attended college, and got certified as a pressman along with my father. And my uncle he was put into deportation proceedings more than 7 years ago, and our family at that time could not afford to pay for a lawyer. He was taken both from his wife and my two cousins who have had to grow up without him. Investing in the LA Justice Fund is also an investment in Los Angeles because deportation results in huge financial losses to the city and breaks up families. As children can end up in foster care, families can risk homelessness and hunger. So I urge you all to please allocate that $1 million for the LA Justice Fund to provide lawyers for those of us, for our family members who can't afford it.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Orino Opinaldo, followed by Beverly Roberts. And I understand Mr. Kwan is now in the room, so Mr. Kwan will follow Ms. Roberts. Mr. Opinaldo, welcome.
I, Orino Opinaldo, bless you. I am wearing this shirt, Occupy Fights, And I hope you are not like judges who practice ego justice for themselves. Wells Fargo put 3 insurances on my property, which for 18 months Wells Fargo would never respond to why. But that was a very way to take my family home. I asked you to ban sales goals of banks, and many other banks are committing that fraud also. I asked you to divest from Wells Fargo and accept a committee of better banks before the budget passes. Please do not be ego politicians who cares not for what Wells Fargo has done to citizens throughout the world. Thank you for listening to my experiential data. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I do just need to note, though, sir, that the issue of divestment and Wells Fargo is a separate motion. It is not part of this budget, so we're not going to take a lot of comment about it. No, I'm not going to do it back and forth. I'm just telling you so that for the sake of other speakers, that we're not going to hear a lot of public testimony about that because we're dealing with the budget right now. I'm not going to do it back and forth, sir. Not going to do it back and forth. So our next speaker is Ms. Roberts, followed by Rob Kwan, followed by Caitlin Billis. I mean, if you can draw a correlation to the budget, please do, but otherwise it's going to be out of order because I have about 50 cards to go through. I can't take time to talk about other subjects besides the budget.
Great. Hi, my name is Beverly Roberts, and we met with some of you guys on Lobby Day, along with ACE and Committee for Better Banks. Where is the legislation for responsible banking auditing? Banks are rich enough. Ban sales goals. Sales goals hurt the community and workers. The legislation should come out before the budget. Let's make the legislation strong. We need to do this because we're hurting. And what's happening with the settlement money that you sued Wells Fargo for? What's happening with it?
Mr. Herman, sit down. Mr. Spindler, sit down. Stay in your seats. Go ahead, ma'am.
The city of LA needs to set an example to the rest of the country. Our government should stand strong against bank fraud and worker abuse. Where is the legislation for the responsible banking audience?
Mr.
And just
Kwan?
one more thing. After 25
No,
years...
ma'am. No, I was really... I'm sorry, we're out of time. Mr. Kwan, followed by Caitlin Billis. Ma'am, I'm sorry, I can't give more time to you because you want to keep speaking. Rob Kwan, followed by Caitlin Billis, followed by Isabel Sanchez. Okay, there won't be any disruptions to this meeting. One more person makes a noise or shouts out, they'll be removed from the room.
Rob Kwan.
Sorry, Mr. Kwan.
I'd like to thank you for giving me a second chance.
Hold on 1 second, please. Folks, we're dealing with a $9 billion budget. We will consider other issues in the ordinary course of our business, but we will not have our consideration of a $9 billion city budget disrupted. We just won't. So I won't tolerate any disruptions of this meeting. Mr. Kwan, please, go ahead.
Thank you. Speaking about the Justice Fund, I ask you and all of your colleagues to spend a day in an immigration court. Understand what that process is like and how it's different from our regular courts. You'll see judges asking clients to waive their right to an interpreter due to limited resources. You'll see nonprofits scrapping to help refugees, children who have no idea what's going on, let alone legal counsel. You'll see a vast difference in how the laws you craft are upheld based upon which judge is hearing the case and whether the client has a lawyer or not. You'll find yourself asking, how useful are our laws? How useful is our Constitution if those who need it most have no way of utilizing it? Undocumented immigrants may not feel like your problem. They don't vote, they don't contribute to campaigns, but they say it takes a village to raise a child, and I say that it merely takes your inaction to continue the unraveling of that village. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Our next speaker is Caitlin Billis, followed by Isabel Sanchez, followed by Talia Inlander. If I called your name, just come on up. Don't wait for others. Just come on up. If you get to the mic, you get to speak. Okay. Caitlin Billis, is she not here? She's not here? Okay, thank you. Isabel Sanchez? Not here. Talia Inlander? No? Okay. Andres Kwan, followed by Sujana Gowney, followed by Edna. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon. I'm Andres Kwan, attorney with the ACLU. Because we are in LA, we are an epicenter for Trump's deportation machine. Trump will try to detain and deport as many immigrants and break up as many families as he can get away with. And as you know, he has blanket criminalized an entire community as bad hombres, as not deserving to be treated with dignity and humanity. To begin to resist Trump's deportation machine, we must at the very least ensure every member of our community facing deportation has a lawyer. Having a lawyer can make all the difference. It is the single most important factor to successfully fighting the government's charges that you are deportable. Thus, the LA Justice Fund is one of the most important and urgent actions the city can take to resist Trump in partnership with the county, private funders, and immigrant rights organizations. Now is the time for you to approve the funds. We strongly urge you to approve the full funding, and the funds must come from the general fund so that we can help create a future where no detained immigrant faces deportation on their own. Further, we strongly oppose any carve-outs. As we resist Trump, we must also refuse his bad hombres framework, which creates a notion of the deserving and the undeserving. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Our next speaker is Sujana Gowney, followed by Edna, followed by Ana Rana.
Hi, I'm speaking on the Justice Fund. A young woman stands in front of a judge without a jury of her peers. She doesn't speak the language, and she stumbles over her words, trying desperately to defend herself against deportations, charges she can barely understand in a system that is built almost entirely against her. This is the reality against which we are fighting. For every single person facing deportation, without carve-outs, without exception, to have access to a lawyer. Due process for all has always been a fundamental human right. And when you poke holes in a net that was not meant to have holes, you are ensuring that people fall through that net. Do not seek to widen the gap between immigrant and non-immigrant and compounding the injustices that already exist in the criminal justice system. It is not in keeping with the values of the city, the state, or this country. As such, we ask you to allocate the $1 million in general funds to the LA Justice Fund without delay, understanding that the amount is not enough and will continue to grow over the years. We ask that the fund doesn't have any carve-outs, so the young woman I used in my example and others like her will not be left to fend for themselves. And we ask that you stand for your communities the way they have stood for you. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Edna, followed by Ana Rana, followed by Nina Torres. Good afternoon.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Edna Monroy with CJA, California Immigrant Youth Justice Alliance, and also the Eyesight of LA Coalition. I'm here because I'm definitely very concerned that we're almost 6 months into the year, 2017, and we still don't have a solid LA Justice Fund. We're more than 6 months into this administration that has threatened our various intersectional communities, left and right, and so it's very concerning that we as LA, as Angelinos, haven't taken a stance to stop the dehumanizing, the deportations, and the incarceration of our communities. I urge you to support a solid LA Justice Fund with no carve-outs. We need that full $1 million to support community members that are obviously no longer here, right, that are in critical positions where they find themselves speaking to a judge with no translation, with no support, such as my uncle that was deported when he was forced to sign his own deportation order. So these are just stories that are left and right, and it's just very critical for us as LA to take a stance. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Ana Rana, followed by Nina Torres, followed by Scott Dule. Sorry if I'm doing the best I can, but...
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Anna Raya, and I am a law student. And I've actually witnessed firsthand in an immigration proceeding 2 individuals. One happened to be represented by an attorney and another did not. And the end result ended being that the first gentleman was allowed to stay in this country and the other was deported, even though they had seemingly similar circumstances of being in this country for 20 years. And that is why I was shocked and overwhelmed at the level of injustice in my city. And that is why I urge the city to take action, and I welcome the city to take action for the instilling of my core values of providing access to justice and due process for all. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Nina Torres, followed by Scott Dule.
Good afternoon. My name is Nina Torres, and I'm from the National Immigration Law Center. I'm here to urge the Budget and Finance Committee to approve the full $1 million in the mayor's budget and immediately allocate to the LA Justice Fund. The National Immigration Law Center is dedicated to defending and advancing the rights of low-income immigrants. We believe that all people who live in the United States, regardless of their immigration status, national origin, or criminal history, should have the opportunity to achieve their full potential. To do this, all immigrants who are in removal proceedings should have access to a competent attorney who can represent them during these complex proceedings. It is important for the City of LA to be a leader, and we want to thank you for hearing us today. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Scott Dule, followed by Emmy McLean.
Hi, Scott Doyle. Bad handwriting, I'm sure it's me. I'm also here to speak in support of the LA Justice Fund and to urge this committee and the full council to view its initial allocation as only the first step and eventually develop in implementing a program to guarantee universal representation for all those facing deportation proceedings. Covering the debate in Sacramento around what was formerly known as the Due Process for All Act, a local reporter wrote that it was like seeing the proverbial slippery slope in action right before his eyes. What began as a discussion about the principle of due process had turned into negotiation about who, in fact, is deserving of that due process. I urge this committee to not allow that slippery slope to happen here in Los Angeles. The denial of due process to some is a threat to due process for all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Doyle. I apologize. Now that you say it, it's obvious when I read it. All right. Our next speaker is Emmy McLean, followed by Megan Choi, followed by Caleb Crowder.
Hi, my name is Emmy McLean. I'm a lawyer with the National Day Labor Organizing Network, and I also want to speak in support of the LA Justice Fund being fully and urgently funded. I represent a mother and a grandmother who has lived in the United States for 30 years. When she was placed in deportation proceedings, she was initially forced to represent herself, and a judge ordered her held on a $60,000 bond. Months later, when her daughter's teacher helped her get a lawyer, her bond was reduced to $5,000, and as a result, she was reunited with her 5 U.S. citizen children and her 4 U.S. citizen grandchildren, and she now has a chance to stay in the United States. I'm not seeking recognition for lawyers, but just trying to make clear what should be patently obvious. Lawyers in legal proceedings make a world of difference. It can be the difference between whether someone is forced into exile or is allowed to stay with their family. It can be the difference between life and death. And a growing number of jurisdictions are setting aside funding to rectify the injustice of the lack of lawyers in proceedings. The funding and eligibility requirements in the CAO report that has been unanimously endorsed by the Immigration Committee should be the minimum. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Megan Choi, followed by Caleb Crowder, followed by Vanessa Barron.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Megan Choi. I'm an organizer with Ground Game LA, formerly the Jessica Sounds campaign for CD13. I wanted to thank the committee, particularly Councilwoman Martinez, for her commitment and support and leadership for all women. We're here today to advocate for the full, swift approval of the $1 million for an all-inclusive justice fund from the general fund budget. 10% of Angelenos are undocumented. They are our friends, our family, our neighbors. They have built and sustained entire industries, and they are taxpayers. They are the reason why LA and Southern California made it through the recession. We have all benefited from our undocumented Angelenos. It would be unjust, undemocratic, and morally reprehensible to turn our backs on them now in a time of need, in a clear time of crisis. We are faced with a critical opportunity to support our women, our immigrants, and our families. We call for urgency, and we ask that you exercise the leadership that we need. Please listen to the community organizers and the legal organizations and service providers that are here today. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Caleb Crowder, followed by Vanessa from Kiwa. I think it's Barron, maybe it's Balboa. I apologize. Mr. Crowder.
Good afternoon. I'm Caleb Crowder. I'm also an organizer for Ground Game LA. My hope is, in this time of crisis for our immigrant brothers and sisters, a crisis that calls for swift and steadied action, that the City Council will approve the full $1 million in the mayor's budget and immediately allocate it to the LA Justice Fund. And my hope is that this is only the beginning of an ongoing investment in removal defense for LA residents, because no person should face deportation and detention without an attorney. Currently, 70% of detained immigrants in the LA area do not have lawyers. We have to remedy this because we know that immigrants with lawyers succeed nearly 5 times as often. And I consider times like these and moments like this to be reason for pause, an opportunity to actualize the equality and fairness that American ideology purports to provide. And we must not provide merely just attorneys and legal counsel. It must be fair. There must be due process, and no immigrant should face deportation without an attorney. Look, we're governed by humans. Humans err, but we have an uncanny ability to right the wrongs and turn the ship around. Immigrants are a huge driving force of the economy of LA, so an investment in the LA Justice Fund is an investment in LA. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Our next speaker is Vanessa from Kiwa. Is Vanessa here? Okay. Our next speaker then will be Scarlett De Leon, followed by Jose Eduardo Sanchez, followed by Rosemary Molina. Okay, thank you. So that would bring up Rosemary Molina, followed by Mario Fuentes, followed by Amina Kazi.
Good afternoon. I strongly urge the Budget and Finance Committee to approve the full $1 million allocation in the mayor's budget for the LA Justice Fund. No person should face deportation or detention without an attorney, especially if the city can help it. I'm here to represent South LA. South LA is home to a growing number of immigrants and mixed-status families. 88% of all youth in South LA are citizens, and 36% of them have at least one undocumented parent. Our community still faces over-policing, disinvestment, and poverty. This makes us especially vulnerable to incarceration and deportation. I want to quickly share the story of one of our high schoolers, Claudia Pacheco. When she was 5, her father was incarcerated and subsequently deported. Her family didn't have access to legal counsel. Her last memory of her father was seeing him behind glass, and he won't be able to see her graduate at the top of her class next year. Her father could have been helped by a universal representation policy. Deportation is a disruptive process. Inclusive due process and representation can help families navigate this traumatizing system and the process of deportation. Please fully fund the LA Justice Fund immediately.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Mario Fuentes, followed by Amina Kazi, followed by Maro Kakusian.
Thank you for your time. I work with the LA Voice. It's a community, multi-faith, multi-ethnic community organization across the city and LA County, representing about 60,000 families. 1979, I was here in this chamber, and there was a black gentleman by the name of Tom Bradley who stood tall and offered some measure of protection for myself and my family when I was a refugee from El Salvador. That was the Special Order 40, which is now archaic. Vicky, my niece, just arrived from El Salvador, and she is due in court next month. More likely, she will be denied her case and end up in detention. I was meeting with members of the community in Hancock Park. These are all the nannies that do the cleaning, and they were very concerned about their future because of the lack of immigration reform. So a lot of these people inevitably will end up in trouble because of the lack of documents. So I urge, on behalf of LA Voice, that you support the Inclusive LA Justice Fund and fund the $1 million towards it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Our next speaker is Amina Kazi, followed by Maro Kakusian, followed by Evan Araiza. Amina's not here. Okay. Ms. Kakusian.
Good afternoon, Council. Pablo Alvarado speaking to immigrants. The good news is that they're only going after criminals. The bad news is you're all criminals. The idea of a disqualification based on criminal history is one that seems reasonable at first. It's not, though. Not in the United States with Donald Trump as president. We live in a country where a powerful, unchecked federal government can make up alternative facts. We live in a country where a 10-year-old non-English speaker had to represent himself in his own deportation proceeding. We live in a country where ICE agents pretended to be police in order to gain consent. to extract a grandfather, a 20-year resident of California, based on the ridiculous claim that he was actually someone else with a criminal record. Yes, ICE actually used someone else's criminal record to arrest a grandfather and put him in a detention center where he has now been held for 3 months. I urge you to fund the full amount for legal defense for everyone, regardless of criminal history. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Evan Araiza, followed by Reverend Martin Garcia. Good afternoon.
Hi there. My name is Evan Araiza, and I'm here to urge the council to support a fully inclusive and fully funded LA Justice Fund. Thank you.
Whoa. And our final speaker is Reverend Martin Garcia. Reverend, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Council. My name is Martin Garcia, and I'm also with part of LA Voice, representing different churches, synagogues, and mosques. One of our groups that we represent are churches that are composed by immigrants. And in many of the workshops that we teach to those groups about Know Your Rights, we discover the vast majority of many immigrants who are hardworking people who wake up every morning because they want their children to succeed, they want their congregations to thrive, they want the society and the city of LA to be successful and to be thriving and to have income to do our work. So I encourage that on behalf of that immigrant community, support and fund fully the LA Justice Fund.
All right. Thank you very much, sir. And that concludes public comment, which is now closed. So members, that brings us to consideration of potential amendments to the CLA's report, and then we'll go ahead and vote on the report as a whole. Excuse me. So I'd like to first start with a few motions of my own that I think may capture some of the things that we've been talking about, and then go ahead and jump in with any others that you'd like to add. So I'd like to first move that we reduce the funding allocated to the Budget Stabilization Fund by $1,078,000 in order to fund the following items. Number one, a GCP allocation of $500,000 for supplemental Clean Streets funding. Number two, a GCP allocation of $175,000 for general operations funding for Casa Libre Freedom House. Number three, a GCP allocation of $200,000 for general operations at Reach for the Top. And number four, funding in the amount of $203,000 for the Department of City Planning, with a further instruction that the CLA add position authority for one principal planner position. Next, consistent with the motion that I think Mr. Englander introduced earlier, and let me make sure this captures it, I would move to instruct the CLA to implement the LAPD civilian hiring plan as outlined in the communication from the Chief of Police today, taking into account any changes that were proposed in the rack-up and making any necessary adjustments to the budget in the final committee report. Three, I'd like to move that we include an instruction for the CLA to allocate $20 million from the Measure M Local Return Fund in Schedule 52 and $4 million from the Special Gas Tax Fund in Schedule 5 and appropriate them for street reconstruction with instructions for the Bureau of Street Services, Department of Transportation, and the Bureau of Engineering to prioritize specific projects with an emphasis on repair of dangerous conditions in their selection of streets to repair with those funds. And that's all I have for the moment. So, Ms. Martinez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I'd like to make the following amendments. In the budgetary department footnotes under police item 2, labeled Valley Bureau Human Trafficking Task Force, I'd like to carve out $30,000 from the funding that's already allocated for use of undercover vehicles for the OVB human trafficking detail. Okay? And the second amendment I'd like for you to consider is I'd like to ask the CLA's office to increase the funding in the UB line for items under Office of Public Accountability /studies from $750,000 to $1.2 million, with the funding being reimbursed by the Department of Water and Power. This has been an ask from Mr. Pickle. I want to make sure that's addressed as well. Thank you.
And just for clarity, that's fully reimbursed by the Department of Water and Power. So there's no
Fully
general
reimbursed by DWP,
Okay.
correct.
Mr. Bonner?
Yeah, could I ask you to repeat the Measure M, street reconstruction?
Sure. It's to include an instruction for the CLA to allocate $20 million from the Measure M Local Return Fund and $4 million from the Special Gas Tax Fund and appropriate them for street reconstruction. So that would be the basically 50% of the accumulated total of those things that would go into street reconstruction now. The remainder in those to remain in the unappropriated balance for further discussion, as we discussed last week. But the 20 million, the 24 million, the 50% that would be appropriated to street reconstruction would be appropriated with instructions to the Department of Transportation, the Bureau of Street Services, and the Bureau of Engineering to identify and emphasize the repair of dangerous conditions in their selections of streets to repair first.
So my question is, and I don't know if it's for CLA or for you, how much that leaves in the unappropriated pot to be discussed?
It looks like about 23 million, because the unallocated amount in total was going to be about 47 million after this reshuffling of funds. So if from 47 million you'll be deducting 24 million, so about $23 million left.
Okay, and what are we doing with SB1 monies then?
So that would be part of what would be left over. It would be SB1 monies. We'd have to assess how the different accounts would be adjusted. We can't do that right now, but we would have to figure out which accounts to take from both local return as well as the gas tax monies, but there should be sufficient funding within the SB1 amount that would be available for other projects. We just need to figure out what components.
Right.
We're reshuffling, so.
And I'm just curious, is there a reason why, for the recommendation, Mr. Chair, it's you're allocating the 20 million from M as opposed to SB1? Is there a difference?
I think it was more a matter of convenience. They're both funds provide the same degree of flexibility on eligible projects, as I understand it.
Yeah, both of them, we don't have the guidelines yet, so you're right, the flexibility is about the same because we don't know what we don't know. But if you direct us to kind of figure it out, if it is your desire to allocate 24 million now for the purposes of reconstruction, we can go back and determine how that actually affects the schedule, and we can bring that back to you if you allow us with some degree of flexibility, if that is your desire to set aside $24 million now.
The only reason I asked, Mr. Chair, is that the M funds, I would presume, once we see the guidelines, will be broader in their latitude for transit projects than SB1. And so I'd like us to have the more flexible funds to play with as opposed to the ones that are more narrowly tailored to streets.
I'm not certain that in fact is a safe assumption, because I think the SB1 funding was likely to provide very wide latitude. And I think just as a matter of optics, part of the reason is a lot of what Measure M was focused on was the kind of street repair issues. But it really is it's more a matter of appropriating a relevant amount of funding rather than where specifically it comes from.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
If I could just also add to that, with regard to SB1, there are maintenance of effort requirements that we anticipate. And so given that these are reconstruction projects, there is no maintenance of effort that we would have to meet because these would be completely new projects. So in that respect, the new SB1 monies might make a little bit more sense, but as I indicated, if you give us a little bit of time to figure that out, we can bring that back in the committee report to figure out which would be best.
Why don't we do that with pros and cons, and then members keep in mind that all of these allocations can be reappropriated within those funds as need be, even after July 1st. As long as they have the same eligibility requirements, there's no reason that we couldn't move them around within those funds if there's some practical reason to do so later. This doesn't have to be carved in stone, but I think we would all appreciate having your recommendations back with the committee report.
And that is absolutely correct, because none of these monies can be spent until July 1 anyways. I would actually encourage you to, as you go through the review of the unallocated amounts, to also consider some of the other funding that is available for transportation projects, whether it be Prop A, Prop C, local transportation fund monies. There are several funds that provide funding for these types of projects, and it might be of interest to go through and see if there are additional funding that could be made available for reallocation during this upcoming process. And just because there is $23 million that would be left if you approve this action for reallocation, that should not be limiting to the council. The council actually has the ability to make further adjustments as necessary if you decide that you wish to pull additional monies and make additional reallocations. That is within your purview. So that is something for you to consider as you go forward on this process of reviewing the allocation of the unallocated amount.
On that point, Mr. Chair?
Yeah, Mr. Bloomfield.
Can't you liberate the instruction from the source of funds and just designate the amount from any of these funds to be appropriated now?
I think that's essentially what we're doing by asking the CLA to come back with those recommendations. I mean, this is my recommendation.
It's adding another step to the process. We could give the instruction now that it's that amount from whichever fund is most appropriate.
No, I think we have to have a little bit more specificity in giving that direction before the fiscal year begins. I think it would be my preference to try to get that done, especially given the fact that it is flexible. It's not carved in stone. We could change it again, at least initially. Somebody needs to transfer funds from a particular fund into, street services or wherever to do this, and I think it would be easier for that process to be implemented if we actually have something specific, which again would be subject to change. And I further on that point, these are brand new sources of revenue, and this is our first time trying to figure out how to do this, and the pie is likely to get significantly larger in future fiscal years, in that we're only having partial year revenues for these as it is. So I want to also emphasize that whatever we do with this initial funding source does not constrain us in future years where we might come up with an entirely different ongoing formula. None of this is going to be binding on future years, and we'll actually have a lot more resources available in fiscal year 18-19 than we will in this year as well. So this is not intended to be, a binding thing or precedential or anything like that.
I appreciate that, although I do fear that in a certain way it does become sort of precedent setting, and my concern is and some of it's on the merits, and some of it admittedly is on the optics of it, is SB1, I think, in the public and the legislative imagination is infrastructure, streets, roads, and bridges, and M is transit. It's all the different things we talked about in Measure M, and I'm concerned with us in year one setting a precedent in this of saying, yep, the Measure M, just like Prop C, is always going to go into infrastructure. And it sort of just sets that tone for the discussion that it's reconstruction money as opposed to the broader discussion, which we still need to have about M.
Yeah, Mr. Englander.
In listening to this conversation, and this has really been happening since day one of the budget, of the proposed budget, and I've listened a lot to it. And I think Mr. Bond and Mr. Krikorian, you're both absolutely correct. And there's some differing opinions. But I also went back and pulled up all the old political ads on Measure M, from the mayor, from third-party testimonials, looking at the commercials, the videos, as well as the mail. And every single one of them talked about safer commutes, transit, pedestrian-oriented, but it also talked about infrastructure. So there's a combination. Every single one talked about fixing our roads. And I also went out and spoke to a number of people that were under the same impression. And so I think it's a combination of both. And I think what the mayor has done, and while we're not having that debate here and now, in his proposed budget was exactly that. And what the department came back with and the mayor's office came back with was looking at our network of streets that have high injuries and prioritizing those funds based on the injuries. Look, the bottom line is, and I truly believe that we need to do a combination of both. And there's some schools of thought that say fixing roads don't save lives, and we have a lot of people that are being killed on the streets each and every day. That's absolutely true. And I don't think we can fund out stupidity and people that constantly text and drive and distracted driving and a lot of the accidents that are caused, a majority of which can be avoided with safer driving. But it's a combination of things, not just re-engineering left and right turn pockets. It's all of those things. I know that. I see that. And so I think I look forward to that discussion. But we also need to move forward in staffing up, ensuring that there's a lot of work on the front end when we repair roads and do full reconstruction, much more so than, and I won't say simple re-engineering because it's not, and I get that, but there's a lot of other things that need to go into materials and acquisition. There's oftentimes, if the department's given more money, we've already seen they can't do more work throughout the calendar year. The year goes too quickly, and they can only get done and oftentimes have a salary savings, which we grind them on. And we want to make sure that those things begin right away, where re-engineering and doing things for Vision Zero can also happen and will happen, and the funds will be there. And so I don't know that it starts the conversation necessarily to say for all future years and discussions, but I think it's hitting that balance, that sweet spot, that is really important in what people see and expect. We also know that the condition of the roads, coupled with the gas tax, is a regressive tax that hurts those who can least afford it and have further commutes. Right now, driving in Los Angeles is also the most expensive of any major city in the United States, with an average, according to the Texas study, of over $800 a year in car maintenance. That's tires, brakes, alignments, drums, and not to mention depreciation, which is much higher on vehicles here in Los Angeles than anywhere else. So you have cars that are driving less safe because they're not being maintained because of the roads, and it's a combination of things. So it's one of those things I think we sort of need to do it all, and there's not enough money to do it all in a fast enough amount of time, but at least there is this new revenue stream. And I support moving forward with what Mr. Krikorian is suggesting. And there is a significant balance to start implementing and having the discussion of what we need to do to ensure that our communities are made safer for all users of roads and sidewalks. So that's my 2 cents.
Well, I just want to restate my objection. My understanding of what we were doing a week ago was that we were putting stuff in the UB and we were going to have this discussion later. And I don't know if my opinion it will carry the day at council or not. My committee has staked out a position that 50% of the Measure M funds should go for Vision Zero. Again, that may not carry the day, but my understanding was that we were moving forward in a way where that discussion was still going to happen, and I feel that this recommendation, which puts 20 million of Measure M, if that's the way we're going, into Reconstruction, closes the door on that conversation. Because I do think SB1 and M, for a lot of people, are different sources. They're going to have different requirements. I do think M is going to be more flexible for transportation uses than SB1. I know there may be some disagreement on that. And that most folks are viewing SB1 as an infrastructure road repair, and that there's not even sort of a sentiment of discussion about SB1 as being transportation or Vision Zero related. I also want to challenge Mr. Englander's assumption a little bit about the time it takes to get a lot of this stuff done. I know you need to do a lot of ramping up for the reconstruction. If you're installing a median safe harbor on a really wide road in the valley so that seniors have a place to stop as they're crossing a street where a signal is too long, that median takes a while to ramp up to do as well. And to the other argument that I've heard that, the Vision Zero stuff won't be ready to go, Department of Transportation has already taken the high injury network, identified 40 of the hottest spots, and come up with preliminary treatments, secondary treatments to come later. So I'd be a lot more comfortable. My understanding was what we were going to do was not make the policy decision about Measure M today, that we were going to be making that prior to July 1. And I'm just, the way I hear the recommendation, it just feels to me like we're making the decision about Measure M.
Well, I don't think it was quite that. I think what we said was, let's set the Measure M funding aside. But then after a discussion about that, we said, and let's also set aside the SB1 funding and take that all together, which is what we've done. And then split that and saying, let's take some of it to start with street reconstruction and paving starting on July 1, not hold that up, but at the same time, the other 50%, which is what we had talked about, of the larger pot, and start making that determination about how that gets appropriated. So I think it's consistent with the same objective we talked about, except not specific to particular funding sources, because we lumped them together and broadened the pot. So that was the intention. And again, I will restate that nothing that we do here predetermines what we may or may do from a policy perspective in allocating that remaining 50% or prioritizing the 50% that goes to, street resurfacing or future years or with regard to funding sources. It's all we just have to do. We have to put something in the budget right now. This is my suggestion. We can modify it later as need be. I do, just on your point about people's expectations, I think, and actually Mr. Blumenfield may very well want to weigh in on this too, because he's spoken about it. What people expected out of Measure M varies a lot with who you're talking to and what part of town you're in and what part of the county you're in. But I know for my constituents, an awful lot of the attractiveness of Measure M was not necessarily big, sexy capital projects. It was fixing local streets and sidewalks, and that was the kind of what people were really motivated by. So it's difficult to identify what people wanted from each of those different things, but I think a strong argument can be made that an awful lot of people that are in the city of Los Angeles saw Measure M as an opportunity to do exactly the kind of resurfacing we're talking about, as well as other things as well, but that was one of the attractive things. So, we can, if it's the committee's pleasure, I'm not wedded to some particular ratio of these things. We can modify the ratio a little bit if that, raises a comfort level. The important point to me is that we get started on streets on July 1, and that there's funding there to do that, and that another portion of that funding be set aside for future policy discussion and determination as to meeting our public safety Vision Zero goals as well as the other goals. So,
if I could just ask one question. Yeah. The 50% that remains in the UB, how are we classifying that? Is that classified as transportation, public works, street services, general services, just vaguely, or is that a Vision Zero UB pot?
Well, I don't think we would be in a position to identify that specifically as Vision Zero. Otherwise, we are putting the cart before the horse. Then we are making that policy decision and saying 50% is going to go to Vision Zero. And I don't think that was the collective intention to make that determination. Mm-hmm. It was to have a discussion about making that determination. So the exact budget language that we would use to capture that concept, I would leave to the CLA. But the intention would be 50% into street reconstruction, 50% to be allocated among the departments to meet those other goals, subject to further council consideration.
So in the end, that's asking me to vote for a budget that doesn't have a Vision Zero program.
Well, if you want, we could use the same language that the mayor had originally proposed, which was, included the Vision Zero reference in it, but didn't specify what those would be. And frankly, the converse is also true. As of today, if we're going to vote for Vision Zero funding, I don't think any one of us can say what that means. There's a concept, a philosophy, a commitment, but I don't know what that money will be spent on at all. It might be a variety of different engineering solutions that somebody might come up with. It might be a variety of other things, but by identifying it as Vision Zero, we're kind of buying a pig in a poke on that too. So at some point, that's going to have to be appropriated to specific expenditures. Mm-hmm. And we don't have those yet. We don't have a proposal in front of us to do that. So that's why I think the better course is to leave that for further delineation by the relevant departments and further consideration of the policy things. So that's kind of where I am. Mr. Bloomfield, did you want to comment on this? No. Okay. Ms. Martinez?
I concur with Mr. Bonin. I just feel like the conversation about Measure M hasn't taken place. And so when you both talk about our commitments in terms of what we ask the voters to vote on Measure M, I come from a community that hasn't gotten either. We haven't gotten our roads repaired, and we also haven't gotten our fair transportation. And so I'm coming from a place where we need our safety mechanisms to get our kids to school and walk safely across the street without getting killed. At the same time, we need our roads repaired. But Mr. Bonin had made you had asked for a report back, right, Mike, in terms of allocating 50% of Measure M to Vision Zero, yes. And we haven't even had that conversation. And so I feel, quite frankly, I feel like we heard from the Bureau of Street Services. We can, at least for myself, I don't think that department is ready to ramp up. I think we had so many questions of Mr. Nazario and quite frankly, the inability of the Bureau to actually deliver on what we expect them to, especially with this amount of money coming our way. And so I have questions about the department even ready to ramp up on July 1st, but we haven't even had the conversation about how to allocate Measure M and our conversation about Vision Zero. So I'm very perplexed in terms of what we're doing here today.
And DOT does have specific plans and specific projects. They have a capital plan for 50 streets that was in the budget memos that came back. They talk about phase one treatments of signs, bollards, and traffic signals. I mean, there are a lot of specifics in there.
Members? What's your alternative suggestion, Mr. Bonner?
I would suggest that what I had thought earlier last week is that the entire 44 million was going to be in the UB for this conversation to be had before July 1. And I think that's reasonable enough because it addresses my concerns about wanting to at least have the policy discussion about Vision Zero, Ms. Martinez's concerns about does Bureau of Street Services have the ability to deliver on the things rather than assuming that they're ready to go for July 1.
Yeah, Mr. Reverend.
Just to weigh in on assuming whether they have the ability on July 1. From working with them and having the conversations, they're not taking on new projects that haven't been identified or vetted with either neighborhood councils or certainly even the council offices. These are identified streets for reconstruction that they have the workforce, the materials, they have everything they need. This is something they do on a regular basis, and we haven't fixed completely failed streets at all last year. They did a number of them that council members use discretionary funds for, but it's continuing a program they already have. It's the more concern is at the end of the fiscal year, not at the beginning, where they didn't smooth out their work plan, or they finished everything they needed to do because they smoothed it out too evenly, and they ended up having salary savings at the end. They could have done more miles with, but it's certainly not at the front end where they already have certainly the workforce and materials. I would be concerned that if we put off, or if there's a disruption in conversation on a policy and put off any of the failed street reconstruction that does take a lot more time and you can't smooth it out, it's much more difficult to catch it up at the end because you reroute traffic and have a lot of other issues and problems. But I think their biggest issue is usually at the end of the year rather than the beginning of the fiscal year, and that we've got to move forward. Now, in terms of the projects that Vision Zero has identified, I will be blunt and honest that they have yet to have a conversation. I know they're coming in. I'm not sure what their public process is. We just had a street resurfaced in my district last week, and where it was re-slurried, and Vision Zero team decided to take a lane of traffic out for the restriping, and we hadn't been contacted. We had this issue with DOT at one point, and it was a unilateral decision with no information to us. And this is a street that has no issues. In fact, very few accidents. I won't say none, because that would probably be impossible here in Los Angeles, but very, very few in a side residential street. And so we're now having that conversation with them. But I would be concerned without having the conversation of even understanding what their process is. There are things we absolutely have to do, there's no question. But I'd like to get a better understanding of exactly what those projects are. We know what streets are identified for major reconstruction. Those have been mapped out, vetted. Everyone knows what they are. Particularly those right-hand lanes where they have bike lanes that have to be fixed. And we know what happens in those most dangerous incidents when they're not. And I would be hesitant to put that off, knowing that those are such a hazard to pedestrians, to traffic, to cyclists, to every major part of transportation. So it's not just the infrastructure. And that meets the objectives of Vision Zero for those reconstructions, for those high-injury networks. They call them high-injury networks for a reason. So I'd be hesitant to put off that part of the discussion, but I would be committed to having the balance of the part of the discussion, figure out exactly what are the programs I know they have mapped out. I'd like to hear their public outreach effort and what that means to make sure we can start without going, if you will, down the road and not knowing that they're working in different communities and we know what they're doing. And I think that's really important as well as the public input.
Let me see if I can try to bring some consensus about this, because I don't think that there's as much of a chasm here as there might appear to be. I think that our collective commitment is to using as much of this money as we can to enhance public safety. There's a significant overlap between pavement condition and public safety, and improving pavement condition and adding public safety infrastructure, because the two kind of have to go hand in hand. If you're reconstructing a street, that's the time when you re-engineer it, that's the time you add other safety infrastructure and so on. There should be a significant overlap in these things. If the concern that I'm hearing from Mr. Bonin, part of the concern is the allocation as between Measure M and other sources, I don't care enough about that for that to be a sticking point. So if we want to take, say, 50% of Measure M and 50% of SB1 and do it that way, allocate it that way, then that would be okay with me. But I think, to Sharon's earlier point, it would be appropriate for the CLA to come back. If those are our proposals, even we can recommend both, and then the CLA comes back with a recommendation based on flexibility and so on. The other concern that I heard you express, which I understand, is if you don't have some kind of an indication that there's a Vision Zero component of this at all, the amount might be zero. I think, as a matter of good faith, that's no one's intention, that would be the case. It's not the mayor's intention. It's not any of our intention to have that be the results. Clearly, it's one of the mayor's priorities. It's something that the mayor's spoken at length about. But at the same time, if 50% of this funding is appropriated as Vision Zero, that's making a policy determination that I don't think we're quite prepared to make either. So what if we were to say that you take 50% of this funding for street reconstruction, 50% from M, 50% from SB1. The remainder then is unallocated, and the CLA should make recommendations to ensure maximum flexibility with regard to that funding to implement Vision Zero and other potential public safety improvements.
Well, Mr. Chair,
yes, but just to finish that thought, and of course, that would not be the end of our work. We would have that in the budget, but then we would have between now and July 1st, and even after July 1st, to continue to identify what does that mean? How much of that money is going to go to traffic lights? How much is going to go to re-engineering? How much is going to go to pedestrian medians? How much is going to go to bike lanes or other things? We can have that discussion, but we can't have it in time to pass this budget. Yeah, Mr. Bloomfield.
And just as a technical question, is SB1 even going to be available on July 1st? So doing the 50-50 may be the ideal in a certain Solomonic sense, but in a practical sense, I don't know, maybe the CLA can answer that, but I don't think it's going to be available on July 1st.
So there's the SB1 increase. I guess what I meant to say was the gas tax component of it, including the existing gas tax revenue stream. But right, that's what's included in the collective pot now, with the expectation that that will increase with implementation of SB1.
Right, there might have to be some front funding issues, though. Mr. Blumenfield is correct. The specific SB1 revenues won't be received yet. But that's not to say that there aren't existing monies within the gas tax fund that couldn't be used to front fund if that was your desire to go forward with doing reconstruction.
I can take a couple more comments, Mr. Englander, and then what I want to do also, because a lot of this, frankly, is implementation. We're doing the budgeting. A lot of it is departmental implementation. So I would like to invite Mr. Szabo, if he'd like to come forward after Mr. Englander, to offer some thoughts from the mayor's team as well. Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Englander.
Just a thought, and listening to the conversation and some of the comments that Ms. Martinez made earlier as well. And just for clarity, and it really relates more to, I think, Councilman Bonin's concern over where these funds are and how they're used. Repair and maintenance go directly into street services. Reconstruction is first touched by Bureau of Engineering and Transportation, and looking at it first for a re-engineering of a street. It's not just going out it and going about it to simply reconstruct it. It's a full re-engineering of complete streets, which we talk about on all of those turn pockets, all of those signal issues, all of the issues with mobility. We're not just talking about asphalt, concrete, or paint on the ground. It's much more than that on a reconstruct, which is one of the reasons it's so expensive. And I think if there's any department that really knows how to do it well, it's the Bureau of Engineering, and they are very ready to begin. And particularly since we have such a major backlog there at $4 billion in F&D streets. But I'd like to hear from Mr. Szabo as well. So thank you for calling him up.
No specific questions. You've heard kind of this discussion. You see that we all kind of want to get, I think, to generally the same place.
Right.
Our priorities, I think, are entirely consonant with the mayor's priorities on this, but we're having, a bit of challenge in the actual implementation of how those funds will be staged. Right. So, what thoughts do you have on that?
I would say, Mr. Chairman, the interest that clearly the committee is showing in addressing a multitude of, in many cases, overlapping interests and objectives is what the mayor's initial proposal was trying to get at, which is why we allocated dollars specifically for reconstruction. And as Mr. Englander said, the intention of blending the reconstruction and Vision Zero is because the reconstruction would be handled by the Bureau of Engineering. They would partner with the engineering staff at Transportation to design a complete and safer, fully reconstructed street from the ground up. If we're going to do the reconstruction, we want to make sure that everywhere we can, we're implementing the safety improvements, and that the choice of those streets to be reconstructed should be driven by the streets that are the most dangerous, where you're having the most deaths and which are in the worst condition. I would say that based on what we've heard, the mayor would support the motion that the chair made, if that's the direction the committee wants to go. It is a critical priority for him, given the commitments that he made while selling Measure M, that a large portion, and I would say the majority of the local return dollars, go towards fixing streets, fixing roads. He said it 1,000 times, both on television and everywhere he was going throughout the county to sell it. So that is a very important priority for him. So if it's moved now, or if his initial proposal is maintained, either of those would work. But it's also important, as he said in the State of the City, that as we move forward with that work, that we incorporate our liability concerns and our safety concerns that Vision Zero would address. So I would, again, if you wanted to move forward with the chair's recommendation, and that was what the final budget, the adopted budget, suggested, the mayor would certainly sign that. We would have more difficulty if there was uncertainty around where the Measure M dollars are going to go as it relates to street resurfacing or reconstruction. I don't know if that's helpful in getting to a consensus, but I think we could work either way.
Okay. Anything?
Okay. If I might, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
I appreciate everything Mr. Szabo just said. Thank you, Matt. I was also with the mayor at the press conference when he announced Vision Zero, and when he signed the executive direction. And I was in this chamber when we voted to endorse Vision Zero as sort of one of our key objectives. I'll put my cards on the table. I'll be very, very frank about sort of the real politique of this. Is while 50% of Measure M, or the general pot we're talking about, is very, very ambitious. I knew that when I proposed it. It is small compared to the need, and ridiculously small compared to what New York and cities that are serious about this are doing. But I think it is what we need to be doing. If we take 50% right now and move it to Reconstruction and leave only the $23 million for the policy discussion, then basically I think the best we can get for Vision Zero is 50% of that pot that's left, because the let's do concrete groups are going to come and want some of that for additional reconstruction. So I feel like if I agree, and maybe I'll be on the small end of a lopsided vote, but I feel that if I agree with putting half of the money to reconstruction and only leaving half of it in the UB, the most I can wind up getting is 25% as opposed to 50%, because half of what's left in the UB is going to wind up for reconstruction as well.
Can I speak to that point for a minute, which is you're presupposing that the discussion is just about this year, whereas the policy discussion is about the next 10 years or the next 20 years or the next 100 years. With Measure M, it goes on forever. So I don't see it that way. And while I may not agree with you on the allocation, but as terms of what we're going to be looking at, we're going to be looking at the policy prospectively, not just this year. So you may be right about the money for this year, but the discussion, I think, is going to be not presupposing that every year we're going to first forward fund 50% reconstruction, then discuss what the next 50% is about. So I hear what you're saying. I'm also concerned about timing. I don't want us to, and I think we all are, we don't want any of this discussion to slow down, rubber hitting the road or asphalt hitting the road or Vision Zero hitting the road come July 1, and that's what this is about. But I think the policy discussion doesn't have to be limited to the remainder, because it goes multiple years.
So would it be...
Wait, can we go to Ms. Martinez?
I don't want to continue to beat around the bush. So the fact that you had requested a report back to make a 50% allocation of Measure M to Vision Zero, is that what got us here, Matt? Is it because Mr. Bonin asked for a report back on how to make a 50% allocation of Measure M towards Vision Zero? Is that what got us here today? Because what I'm hearing from you is that this mayor won't sign a budget unless there is certainty about how we're going to move money for reconstruction of streets. So I just want to, Mike, I don't want to speak for you, but I just want to be very clear about what you are saying and how we got here, because that was not the conversation where this whole thing began a week ago. This is not where we were at. So I want to know how we got here.
The mayor has been consistent. This is not an either-or proposition for him. He does feel strongly, as I have said, that the majority of Measure M, since it was such a prevalent part of the campaign asking the voters to tax themselves to fix traffic and fix the roads, that be in our first year of allocating those dollars, be allocated in that manner. That does not in any way, and again, as I've said this, time and time, it's fixing the roads and making them safer is not an either-or proposition. And that's why he included standalone dollars in addition to the overlap dollars for Vision Zero. As I said, if it is the committee's decision to add dollars to Vision Zero, the mayor would certainly support that. If it's the committee's decision to take the Vision Zero allocation and put that into DOT's budget and not have it in the UB, we would certainly support that. We want to move forward with these projects as quickly as possible. We just want to do it in a coordinated way. And as it relates to Measure M, it's important that those dollars go a significant portion go towards fixing the roads. And we're definitely open at looking at all of the other funds that can be used for active transportation outside of Division Zero, but adding to that as much as we can as you develop a policy for how we want to fund long-term Vision Zero. Again, I don't want to make it. I want to make it very clear that we're not suggesting that we choose one over the other, but that we do all of it together.
Mr. Chair,
yeah,
I'm
sorry, Mr. Bond. Before you do, I think to Ms. Martinez's point, that's probably a question better directed to me than to the mayor. How we got here was the fact that we had some members who, wanted to move in the direction of maximizing Vision Zero funding, some members who wanted to maximize street reconstruction funding, and my observation that those two goals are not inconsistent, and we needed to find a way that we could facilitate both goals in the most cost-effective and logical and strategic way. And so the proposal that is now before us that I'm moving, and consistent with the CLA's analysis of this and expansion of the pie even more than it was before, I think we have an opportunity to do that in a thoughtful way, which is why we will have a continuing policy discussion about allocating half of the funds while still moving forward as quickly as we can with the street reconstruction money that no one, I think, in the city would question needs to be done today. So this is where we are, is a proposal that I'm making to try to bridge those two objectives and have us have a thoughtful way to meet both of those objectives. Mr. Bond.
So thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that. I agree. I don't think we're as far apart as the conversation sounds. I think that we share the same goal to reconstruct our worst streets and to get to zero traffic fatalities as soon as we can. And I agree that the policies are not at all inconsistent. They are not always overlapping.
Right.
So there clearly needs to be Vision Zero stuff that is not done on streets that have failed. And there are streets that need to be repaired that are not on the high injury network. What has struck me, because we've had this conversation over the period of several days, when DOT was here, when BOE was here, we're having it now, is we've never had the conversation with all of the relevant players at the table simultaneously. With the folks who are here now, with Gary, with Nazario, with Salida, we've had pieces of them, but never all simultaneously. And for me, it would make more sense if we, rather than putting 50% towards reconstruction today, is if we could keep it, all of it, the 44.74 or whatever it is, in the UB today, and then prior to the end of the first week of June, a joint budget and finance T committee meeting or whatever the relevant committees are to discuss it and hammer it out, because I think it can be done. I don't think it's a months-long conversation. I think it's just a matter of getting everybody together.
I'm hopeful that you're right, and I've been hopeful that you're right. That's kind of the exact direction I was thinking of at the beginning of this. And I think there is a Venn diagram, and I happen to think that the 80% or whatever is in the overlap. It could turn out to be wrong as we get those people in the room. I think we should continue to have that conversation, but I continue to believe that for purposes of this budget, we should proceed, as I've suggested, with this split, and then which is not at all mutually exclusive of having that continuing conversation. And by the way, even if we approve a budget with this 50% split, if the outcome of that, getting the players together, is that the departments agree and we agree and the mayor agrees that actually, it's a 90% overlap and we can get started right away and we can fund much of Vision Zero out of street reconstruction funding, then that's fine. We'll be able to make that reappropriation. We'll be able to provide those instructions. Nothing in doing this limits our ability to do that as we go forward. But I think I would feel uncomfortable with a budget that had over $40 million of funding with no real direction to our departments or the mayor, frankly, in how that's going to be spent. I think we just have to have a little bit more definition than that, which is why my suggestion gives definition to a portion of it, leaves a portion of it for further discussion. A budget is never entirely fixed. We can change it if we choose to change it, but it's too big of a chunk of money, I think, to just punt on. I don't think I would be comfortable with that. Okay, anything else, members? Okay, were there any other, can we add anything else to this on this? Are there any other motions that we want to bring up, and then we'll kind of go through the list as we've had it? Go ahead.
Just one additional one. I believe this was missed for whatever reason. It was in the original department memo to the mayor, and for some reason was missed, and that was on the ITA cybersecurity protection for critical assets piece, which if I have to describe what that means just by the title alone, I think you guys all get it. But that's on the cybersecurity protection for the LA tax system, FMS, PACER, Sanitation's SCADA system, the ADSAC, citywide web activity logs, and the firewalls. We didn't fund that. It's about $400,000. I think we may be able to use a UASI, possibly, or a reprogramming. So we'll look at that as a possibility.
Can the CLA speak to that? Because I do recall that was, I think, a unanimous A priority.
Yeah, and I hadn't seen, maybe I missed where it came in, but I haven't.
I don't think that one was actually captured.
Yeah, I think we missed it.
Yeah, I don't think it was actually discussed because we did, with the exception of 2 or 3 items that were not funded, I don't believe this one was addressed as we went through the memos. So it might have been discussed on the day that the department came forward, but it didn't come forward as a...
I think we missed it in that. I think it came forward with the departmental discussion, and we sort of missed it because I couldn't find it in any memo. So
yeah, I don't think it was in a memo.
If we can look into that.
Okay.
Do you recall what the amount of the...
It was $400,000.
Okay.
So if it is the desire of this committee to fund that now, I believe there was $1.5 million that was in the...
Yeah, that wasn't going there for a reason.
Okay, because...
Still,
yeah.
I knew where you were going with that.
Yeah.
We were at $1,078,000, and I noticed there was another $500,000, and that would be clean, but
there's another
committed
0.03% addition to the reserve fund.
So you can instruct us to include a report back to Budget and Finance Committee at the beginning of the year to see if we can identify some either rollover fundings or UASI grant or some other sources of funding.
That would be
and
my
we could
suggestion.
Just trigger that to
I will
report.
get it done, but I would rather not do it with those other funds.
Well,
I think
that
are
would
too
make
critical.
it easier. So if your motion is then to bring it back after the passage of this budget,
so be it.
Then that would make it easiest.
Great.
Yeah. I support that.
Okay. Any other additions? Any other motions? Anything else to add? Okay, so I hope we've captured everything then. So I guess we'll have to just go ahead and do this one at a time. On the first one that I had proposed was to reduce funding for the Budget Stabilization Fund for a series of expenditures, GCP allocation of $500,000 for clean streets, GCP allocation of $175,000 for Casa Libre Freedom House, GCP allocation of $200,000 for general operations at Reach for the Top, and $203,000 for the Department of City Planning with the addition of a position authority for principal planner. Is there any objection to that? Seeing none, that would be the action of the committee. Number 2, instruct the CLA to implement the LAPD civilian hiring plan as outlined in the communication with the chief today, taking into account any changes that were proposed in the rack-up and making any necessary adjustments to the budget in the final committee report. Any concerns or objections? It seems like, is that language sufficient, Mr. Englander? Okay. So
that removes that.
yes, without objection, then that will be the action of the committee. And then I guess we've kind of redone item number 3. So I would change my previous motion then to allocate $24 million from the Schedule 52 and Schedule 5 Measure M and Special Gas Tax Fund revenues. Approximately 50% from each Measure M and the Special Gas Tax Fund.
Did we determine if the Special Gas Tax Fund is going to be available?
Well, that's what I'm going to ask the CLA to report that back before we make that final appropriation. With those funds being appropriated for street reconstruction with a priority on the repair of dangerous conditions in the selection by the departments of the streets to repair, and then the remainder of those funds to remain unappropriated, subject to further consideration and analysis of the policy questions that we've been discussing. And then I'd ask the CLA to report back on whether there are any constraints on the choice of those funding sources for that initial 50% appropriation. So I assume there's objection to that.
I will be a no vote on that.
Okay, so Mr. Blumenfield,
I'm not.
Yeah, okay, so Mr. Blumenfield, Mr. Englander, and myself are ayes. Ms. Martinez and Mr. Bonnet are noes on that. That amendment will be the action of the committee. Ms. Martinez, did you had a motion that I think we approved by consensus.
Yeah, there were only 2 minor amendments.
Yeah, and we
one on
approved those
DWP, the
without
other one
objection.
on the
footnote.
allocation of the
Footnote.
Yeah.
Undercover vehicles. I'm sorry.
Those were agreed to by consensus. Mr. Englander, did you have anything that we haven't already voted on?
The ones I think we went over already.
Can you just restate them so that we're sure that we have this?
Yeah, just to make sure. That was the page 9, the new metric for the procurement where we brought the department up.
Right.
So we've
And
got
I think
that.
there was no objection
There was
to
no
that.
objection to that. And that was just a metric. And on the LA Rise, it was on half of the. Oh, I'm sorry. That was the one where we brought the department up. There was no objection on putting half of those funds in the UB for them to report back.
Right.
I think we've caught.
There was no objection.
We captured everything. I think we're good.
Okay. Anything else,
Thank you.
members, other than what's been specified? Okay. Well, then, as amended, I would ask that we approve the CLA's report with those amendments. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. All in favor? It will be the action of the committee to approve the CLA's report as amended, as we've just indicated. So, congratulations, members. Thank you very much to the CLA. And before we conclude, we did great work, members, this year, I think, in one of the more difficult years that we've had in a while. We managed to do, I think, an effective job of restoring services in a fiscally responsible way. We've worked with great efficiency. We've spent 30 hours of hearings. Last year, I think we did 40 in this process, so we're actually speeding things up, which is great. And none of that could be possible without the extraordinary hard work of a lot of people who contribute to this. And let's first recognize the folks who are helping us here in committee, Richard Williams and Erica Pulst from the clerks for the committee, who do so much to keep us on track and keep us working smoothly. Our CAO, Rich Llewellyn, and his staff, particularly Ben Seha, Jacob Wexler, the whole budget memo squad, To our CLA, Sharon So, and Karen Kalfai and Andrea Galvin, Roy Morales, and the rest of the CLA team. You always do such great work. This really kind of rose above this year. So it was an especially good year for the CLA. Thank you. To the mayor's budget team, Matt Zabo, John Chavez, and the rest of the team, thank you for your cooperative work that we've enjoyed over these years, and this year notably. And our own staffs who help us through this. Mr. Englander's Nicole Burnson, Laura McLennan with Mr. Bonin's office, Arcelia Arce with Ms. Martinez's office, Jeff Jacobberger with Mr. Blumenfield, and the rest of our staff who I know all support the budget staff as we go through these difficult weeks. And I especially have to thank the legendary Matt Hale, who keeps us all on task and manages to make lemonade out of lemons somehow or another as we do this, and the rest of our team in CD2 who supports the work that we're doing. All the general managers and department staff and the countless others who work behind the scenes to make this process run, and especially to the members of the public too. Because I think the Budget and Finance Committee hearings are a great example of where civic engagement really works. You know, when people organize and they come here and they make their voices heard, it makes a difference, and it makes a real difference in what we do and what we're able to do for our constituents. So thank you all very, very much. Is there any other business before us? Mr. Englander?
Yes, one thing. To thank the chair, Mr. Kokorian. In 14 years and how many budgets I've been through, you continue to make it more efficient, get to the heart and the point of what our work here is to do, and we are better off than many of the budgets where we've spent double those hours and triple the report back. And it's been you and your staff who've just done a phenomenal job of getting to the bottom line and making sure that the best interests of the city are always at heart, and that our key functions, our basic services, are funded to the best of our ability. And you've kept us on stable financial footing because of the policies that you've implemented. So I think as the vice chair of this committee, I'd like to say on behalf of all of us, a big round of applause to our chair, Mr. Paul Kokorian.
Thank you.
Yes,
Thank you very much. Well, thank you. No, but please, I don't go for that stuff. But thank you, and I do have to say that we really are blessed with a great committee. Each of you has brought so much to this, and I think this is really the finest budget committee we've had in a long time. And you all do your work. You all advocate passionately, and the result of that is we come up with a really good work product. So thank you all. And until next week, unless I'm missing something, Matt? No? We are adjourned.